Minimalists.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I am Ryan Nicodemus. And together we are the Minimalists.
Welcome to episode 155. We have a special guest in the studio with us today. We're here with Peter Rollins. Ryan, I love you.
I love you more.
Today we're going to...
You know who I love more than you? Peter Rollins.
This is a beautiful moment I'm seeing right now. I feel like I should leave the room, should I? Is this a little private moment?
No way, dude. We asked you to be here with us to share this love.
Well, thank you.
We film all of our most intimate moments.
Yep.
No, today we're actually going to be talking about love, and we're here with Peter Rollins. Pete, well, this is only the second time we've ever met. The first time we met was about a year ago. We did an event in Los Angeles with our shared friend Rob Bell,
yep.
And you came out for that. Thank you for showing up, and we had a really great time at that event. It was one of my favorite live podcasts that we've ever done.
Yeah. I thought you would have me on the stage, but that's why I was there. And then you just stuck me in a seat.
I told Josh we should have, but
I
don't.
Yeah,
What's your problem,
whatever.
And since then, I've really enjoyed. You've had a few conversations on Rob Bell's podcast. I'm going to do our best today to not just reiterate those conversations, but you had this series of 3 conversations last summer, and we'll put links to all 3 of these in the show notes about love. And man, you sort of talked about, well, I don't want to rehash all of it, but there were a few things that really stood out. Now, Ryan and I, we end every podcast episode with a phrase, a sort of mantra that we've come up with, and it's a repurposing of several different quotes, but it's love people and use things because the opposite never works. Right. And I feel like in our society, what we've done now is we have commodified the people in our lives quite often, and it's become almost a default, especially via the technologies that we use now and just the consumerist culture. We've commodified the people in our lives, and we're loving the commodities in our life. And you said a few things during those podcast conversations with Rob Bell that really stood out to me. One of the quotes that I wrote down here was, you said, "Love is not meaningful. Love is what brings meaning into the world." And to me that was just it was beautiful, because I think quite often we're looking for, well, we're chasing happiness, we're chasing pleasure, we're chasing ephemerality, and I think that's often the wrong pursuit. We're really looking for meaning in life, but love, if we're looking for meaning, and love is what brings that meaning into the world. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, and basically, and everybody knows this. As soon as I say it, everyone will go, "Oh yeah, of course." It's that, when you love somebody or when you love a cause, that love makes everything radiant. It really kind of brings depth and density to your life. It makes walks not just getting from A to B, but they can be like a communion with nature. It makes a meal not simply giving yourself energy to survive, but it can become a type of communion with another person. And so when you lose love, often what happens is everything becomes meaningless. You don't just lose one thing, right? You don't have 100 things in your life that are meaningful, and then, I've lost one thing that was meaningful, but I still have 99 that are.
Right. I have 99% meaning left.
Yes, exactly. One's gone, but 99 are in place. Sadly, when you lose love, you can lose the meaning that you get out of everything else. Suddenly, getting out of bed becomes a chore. Going to work is not something that you enjoy if you enjoy your work. Everything becomes grey. So in a sense, when you love someone or when you love a cause, it basically animates your entire existence. And when that is lost, we are under threat of we're under threat of losing care and concern for the world.
Yeah,
I love how the concept is love is almost the motivation or the inspiration, instead of us reacting on the love. Maybe it's just focusing on developing the love more. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I love that approach.
And the other line that really stood out to me that I sent over to my wife as soon as the whole I was re-listening to this series in preparation for this podcast. By the way, we don't do interviews, so I don't want to turn this into a whole interview thing. Yeah. What we do is we show up and we answer questions. So we have some questions from our audience we'll get to in a second. But there was one other line that really stood out to me, and I wanted to bring it to the forefront, and I think it's going to be applicable for the questions we're going to be answering today. But when you said love is giving up what you do not have to someone who does not want it, and I believe it was a quote from a philosopher. And that was so powerful. Giving up what you love is giving up what you do not, giving what you do not have to someone who does not want it. Meaning like the pain and the suffering, like what you do not have to someone who's able to sort of support you and deal with it, notwithstanding the pain.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a difficult quote to unpack, but if we unpack it, if you go onto Tinder or something like that, we're always giving of our excess. I'm smart, I like this, I travel the world. You've got pictures that show you, the excess of your life. You give over this image that you're pretty cool. And people want that. You want to meet somebody who's got it all together, who loves exciting things, who's going to fulfill your life in some way, make it richer. But we're really treating people as objects in that way. We're seeing them with a certain number of criteria that they can give us. Now, there's nothing overly wrong with that. I mean, I want my friends to selfishly like me for whatever, but I don't think it's love. So that quote, which is a paraphrase of Lacan, one way of describing it is, you love somebody when you give them what you don't have, and what you don't have is your lack. What you don't have is your pain, your difficulties, the stuff that, not all your excess, but
your inadequacies.
And then nobody wants that, really. So when you meet somebody who you can share those inadequacies with, and they want them, they can take them on and even celebrate them and nurture them and hold a space for them, then you can say, wow, that's a miracle. That's love. And that's why it's so rare to see. It's so rare for us to experience.
I think so, because we want to always be the best version of ourselves, right? And so, I know that with me and with any of my friends, I do want to be the best version of myself, but sometimes my expectation, even or especially for myself, is too high. And we all want to be, perform at the level of a superhero, but that's not human.
Yeah.
And that's not love. That's not connection. That is performance.
Yes, and we all do it to a certain extent. It's kind of like the selfie phenomenon, where we take a selfie where we look hopefully pretty good, and it maybe if we're into mountaineering or something like that, we'll show a selfie of us up a mountain, or if we like yoga, or even a selfie where we're not even in it, but we take a picture of a cool car or some environment that reflects something of our values. And so in a sense, when we do that, we're putting out an idealized version of ourselves.
Sure.
And, there's no problems with that. People laugh and say, selfies are never just selfies. They're always for somebody else. But it would be much weirder if you just took selfies for yourself. If you just took selfies and then put them in an album and then just looked at them on a Thursday evening and never showed them to anybody else. We want to project out these images. However, they also hide a lot. And they hide our insecurities, and they hide our lack. And whenever you have a loving relationship, that lack is also able to be seen.
Yeah, and being vulnerable with the other person, they appreciate you because of that, because they get to see that other side that maybe the world doesn't get to see. Because there's another side of it too. I mean, you see this sometimes online where there's sort of the vapid side of the woe is me, and that's the other side of the selfie, whether it's photo based or textual. It's oh my God, my life is crumbling, constantly. It's the addiction to the suffering. Absolutely. In a way, and sharing the suffering,
which is the other side of the coin, because it's only when you have an image of a type of perfection that you think you would like that you get depressed because you don't live up to it. If you can have a healthier view that we are all I mean, basically, all of us live between who we are and who we would like to be, and between what we have and what we would like to have. We live in this space of the in-between. And the more we try to get the thing that we want and be the person that we want, the more depressed we are if we don't get it, or the more melancholy we are if we do get it. This idea that we live between depression and melancholy. Depression is the unhappiness of not getting what you want, and melancholy is the unhappiness of getting what you want, right? So we're in this interesting dilemma, and the challenge is to break free of that entire way of thinking. And therefore you get rid of both the excessive I'm incredible, I'm brilliant, fiction, but also you get rid of this despair as well.
Which is a different kind of fiction.
Yeah.
Where everything is terrible.
Yeah.
And there's a show that I've been watching now called Better Call Saul. Are you familiar with this?
I
with
know
Bob Odenkirk?
I know the original series. That's a
Breaking
spin-off
Bad.
of Breaking Bad, but I haven't watched Better Call Saul.
This is like the really boring version of Breaking Bad is the way I could describe it. But there's sort of a lot of existential angst in the main character. But he's, in a way, addicted to failure. I mean, there's this line toward the end of the 4th season that just ended, and where the main character is talking to his significant other, and they're having this argument. He goes, and she says something to him that is very poignant and but pretty sharp. And he says, "Oh, sure, kick me while I'm down." And she says, "Jimmy, you're always down."
Yeah, very good.
And he's addicted to that despair, that being down all the time.
This is, by the way, something we can't, get deeply into it, but this is ubiquitous. This idea, I love the phrase you used, addicted to, what was it? Addicted to failure, being down, addicted to failure. It's like, we think there's a common notion that human beings are, selfish in a sense of they want the best for themselves. You want to maximize your pleasure, minimize your pain.
Yeah.
So utilitarianism. But in psychoanalysis, there is this insight that actually we're really bad utilitarians, that sometimes we can really want the worst for ourselves.
Sure.
Gambling is a good example. People think that gamblers are addicted to winning. But to be honest, most gamblers are addicted to losing. And what happens is, I don't know if you ever played poker or anything, but if you lose some hands, what happens is you go on tilt. And on tilt means you start betting more frantically. And part of the psychology of this is when you're losing, it makes the win seem even more incredible. Right. So if a gambler playing slot machines always won, it would be boring, right? You might win some money, but it would be ultimately really boring. But the fact that you lose a lot generates a fantasy that, oh my goodness, if only I could win, then all of my problems would be solved. Wow. And so we weirdly get into this thing where we're addicted to the loss. It's the loss that generates the excessive attachment to some fantasy.
Because it makes the win that much better
that
for
much
us.
better.
Man, that's an awesome perspective.
If you were winning all the time, though, all of a sudden you're going to get bored and more bored, and then you're going to get pissed off at some point because, like, you never run into someone who you really respect and appreciate, where you really look up to them and you say, well, what's your secret? And they say, well, I'm just really great at winning. I win all the time. I mean, you see crazy people do that. When Charlie Sheen was having his famous meltdown, like the hashtag winning, like you realize, like, that's not winning. That is the facade of winning around a sort of crumbling interior.
Yeah, we live in a weird frame in which, in our society, the losers lose doubly, but even the winners lose. So, I mean, it's funny, if you take an example of a prosperity church, for example, and people sometimes ask, why do people go to prosperity churches?
Like a Joel Osteen.
Joel Osteen,
the one person you follow on
That's
Twitter.
That's true, it is. He is the one person I follow. I find it fascinating.
Actually, I wrote down, Peter, why should I follow Joel Osteen on Twitter? But I have too many questions to ask you, so we'll skip that one.
Yeah, somebody actually created a Joel Rollins Twitter briefly, where it mashed together Joel Osteen quotes and quotes from me. It was very funny.
Well, the weird thing is, like, I heard in the most charitable sort of attribution towards someone like a Joel Osteen, and then we'll get back to I don't mean to cut you off here,
no.
but The most
I'm out of here. I'm gone.
the most charitable saying is that the Joel Osteen is sort of reparenting some people who maybe didn't have that sort of. didn't have exposure to those basic aphorisms when they were growing up, and I know I didn't, but it was possible for me to, Ryan and I grew up in probably nothing as troubling as the Troubles in Northern Ireland, where you're from.
The secret is in the name, yes. The Troubles,
right? But we had our own troubles. We grew up in Dayton, Ohio. It's the overdose capital of America. A lot of drug and alcohol abuse in our childhoods, and I know a lot of that sort of wisdom would have been helpful to us at the time, and so in a way, like, it's almost as if he's like reparenting, and there's a sort of infantilization that's going on in the congregations there. But maybe some of those aphorisms are helpful, but also at the same time, I think that the infantilizing only goes so far to where it's well, you want to put your head through a wall.
Yeah, and the question is, to what extent does one, and I'm talking about Osteen here, but does one keep people in that, or to what extent does someone move somebody through that? And I think it's very important to meet people where they're at, but not keep them where they're at.
Yes.
But the interesting thing about the Prosperity Church in general is, of course, there's lots of statistics to show it doesn't work, right? So people go, well, why do people go to a Prosperity Church if it doesn't work? And the answer is, what we think the answer is if I show you it doesn't work, you'll go, oh my goodness, you're right. Look, people don't get wealthier in the church than in the wider community. It doesn't seem to have the effect. And so then once you're presented with the information, you'll go, all right, I'm going to leave. But that doesn't happen, right? So the question, of course, is, why does that not happen? And from a psychoanalytic perspective, it's actually because the very failure is what keeps you in the church. So basically, you continue to get this fantasy that if you got the money, then you could get rid of all of your problems, you could escape all of your suffering. So you've got this incredible fantasy, right? If you got the money, you would be confronted with the reality that it doesn't work, right? So the very fact that it doesn't work keeps you going back so that you can continue to have this fantasy that continues to drive you. So if actually a Prosperity Church worked, the Prosperity Church would shut down, because you would get the $1 million and you'd go, oh, this gets me a nicer shower. Oh, this gets me a nicer mattress for my bed, right? But it doesn't fix the existential angst.
That is amazing. Well, I mean, it just makes me think how a lot of churches, not every single church, I don't want to like just make a broad sweeping statement, but a lot of churches, it's like they make you feel guilty, and then you go home and you try to like do the right thing. And then you come back to church, they make you feel guilty again. Yeah. And you go home. It's like this vicious cycle of failures almost. Yeah.
And there's something in me that wants that. So a good example would be, say you go to a church and you're sitting there in the pew and you're going, like, I don't really feel that close to the absolute or God or whatever. And maybe if I read the Bible more, maybe if I prayed more or whatever, maybe if I became an elder, because all the elders there having cappuccinos with Jesus in the room out the back, they must have it, right? So you've got this fantasy. But then imagine you're the type of person who goes, right, I'm going to burn my record collection. I'm going to do the missionary work. I'm going to become an elder. What happens is you get to the center and you realize that the center is no better than the edges. So now you've been confronted with the fragmentation of that fantasy. Now, the sad thing is at that point, you probably have your pension and so you have to stay within it. But if you're in the pew, you keep the fantasy alive that if I was the pastor, everything would be great. But once you get to the center, you realize the center doesn't hold. And so this is what Oscar Wilde meant when he said there's only one thing worse than not getting what you want, and it's getting what you want. And of course, because when you get what you want, you realize it's not what you want. I when I came to America, because a family, an incredibly generous family who are deep friends of mine, they had a private foundation, and they offered me basically a patronage for 3 years. So I came to America, and that foundation supported my work for 3 years. I went from basically a squat in Belfast to America, and I was lent a house in one of the wealthiest places in America. And I lived there for 3 years. So I was around the people who, in a sense, had got the American dream. And these are people who had not millions, not tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and sometimes billions. And it was devastating for me personally, but I also saw in that community some people who were very healthy and very happy, and some people who were very depressed and in very difficult situations. And so that's what I mean by even the winners lose. The losers lose doubly because you can't eat, you can't put food on your table, you have to work too hard. But if you ever got the lottery ticket win, you might realize that while it can help in some material ways, as I say, I had a shower that had two heads. I was lovely. Two-headed shower. It's like, oh wow, money can get you a two-headed shower. That's brilliant, you know. And the house was at a really good temperature all the time, and I loved that. But you know, it doesn't take away from the trauma that is humanity. It's because there are two types of trauma: the traumas that happen to us and the trauma that is us. There are traumas that happen in our lives, and there is the trauma that is life itself. And we need to find another way to tarry with that trauma.
Can you expand on the distinction between the two traumas there? Because that's fascinating to me. And I've been doing some deep dives into recent history and trying to, I've had some really significant health traumas in my life. A few years ago, I thought I was dying. I had just a bunch of really bad issues, health issues going on that I've subsequently fixed, but there is the sort of psychological residue of a lot of that. And some of it's associated with geography, some of it's associated with certain people or whatever, and you know, trying to untether that residue from the people or places is more difficult than just cutting a tether. You know, it's like it's trying to get the onion flavor out of the soup. It's pretty difficult.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example, by the way, and sorry to hear you had to go through that, but that's a great example of the difference. One way thing is, so you had health problems and you were confronting the real possibility that you might die. That is a trauma that happens to you. That hasn't happened to me in the same way. But then your doctor maybe says to you, it's all right, you're fine. And then you're like, okay, so I'm going to live. Now, if your doctor was a philosopher, your doctor would say, well, no, you're still going to die. No, life is a terminal illness, right? You're just not going to die of this. That's what's called the ontological dimension. So the kind of traumas that happen to us is, I nearly died. I had cancer. I nearly got hit by a car. And then the deeper trauma of life is, no matter what I do, I am facing death. And again, somebody might have trauma of like drug abuse or poverty in their past. That's a trauma that's contingent to your life. But then there is the trauma of just being human and having to work with a type of sense of existential lack, that no matter what you try, no matter what car you buy, no matter what house you get, you can't get away from this sense of meaninglessness. That
no matter how much you achieve, and especially in our culture, that's the word this whole minimalism thing resonates with people. You know, Ryan and I, minimalism is basically the Trojan horse for us to talk about whatever we want to talk about, because there's this in our culture, it's the trinkets of success that often come to the forefront. It's the selfie of the expensive car, and you talked about the prosperity church. It's the aspirational side of things that draw people into it. But then also, once you figure out, like, once you get halfway there. For me, it was working in the corporate world. Ryan and I grew up really poor, but we had phenomenal success in our 20s, climbing the corporate ladder, and worked our way up to really high middle management. And
the dream. Middle management.
I oversaw an entire cubicle of my fiefdom, and all these people in these cubicles, and I managed all these retail stores, and but the closer I got to the people I aspired to be like, I realized that, like, wow, that as I got closer, the image of them. I had a boss at one point who was on his second heart attack and third marriage, and he just turned 50. Yeah. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If I work my butt off for the next 20 years, I could be just like him. I follow the same recipe, I'm going to bake the same cake.
Yeah. And that's the example of even the winners lose. You guys were winning.
Sure.
And even you saw through it. You saw, oh my goodness, this system is the losers lose doubly, but oh my god, even if I succeed within this frame, I'm losing. And then you made and minimalism became, in philosophy it's called the master signifier, what you mentioned is, but it became the way to break that frame. So that's good, exciting stuff.
The biggest thing I'm getting from this conversation is how important it is to live in the moment. Like, no matter where you're at in life, to find some way to appreciate what you have. And then the other thing is, Josh and I talk a lot about lowering expectations but raising our standards. And when it comes to love, when that quote that Josh brought up about giving something that you don't have to someone that doesn't want it, it's like the best way that I can explain it is like living in Los Angeles. My experience with it was really rough at first. Yeah. And I was telling Josh about this. I'm like, dude, I love LA, but LA doesn't really love me. Yeah. And he's like, well, what's wrong? I'm like, dude, I go to like coffee shop. Hey, how's it going? And they're just like, yeah, can I take your order, dude? Like, what drugs are you on? Why are you so happy? What do you want out of me? Who do you think you? I mean, there's like all these prejudgments. Yeah. So Josh, he's like, dude, you have to turn it down, or you need to turn it up. Yeah. So I said, all right, I'll turn it up. So now when I have those moments where I walk in somewhere, and now like I have my regular spots where like people, they pretty much know me by now, but I'll go somewhere, hey, I'm Ryan, nice to meet you. How's your day going? And they kind of give me that, what do you want to do? What drugs you're on? I'll be like, can I take your order? You can't take my order, but first I want you to tell me how your day is going. Like I'll just be kind of silly and goofy. And I will express that the kindness or the love that I feel without any expectation of getting it back. Yeah. And sometimes I don't get it back, and that's okay. But I will say that when I'm in the moment with that love and I push through that barrier, I will have much better results, and results that I didn't expect. So, when Josh and I were having that conversation and he was like, yeah, I would recommend turning it down or turning it up. Yeah. When I first started turning it up, I just thought I'm just going to make an ass of myself now, like when I go to different places. But
I hear you're very good at that.
But yeah, I'm very, very good at that. But it turns out I'm about 20% good at that, because the majority or 10%, I mean, the majority of the time, the vast majority of the time when I push through that barrier so I'm living in the moment. I am giving with any expectation of giving back. That's raising my standard. That's what I mean. That's what we mean by raising our standard. My standard is be myself, be genuine, push through, be honest, and be consistent. Those are my standards. I don't expect Josh to treat me any way if I act that way. I don't expect you to treat me a certain way if I act that way. But what happens is by pushing through that the trepidation of being ourselves, that truly to me is what is freeing, I guess, is when you can again love without expecting to get loved back. Yeah. And you can raise those standards and keep the low expectations, because when your expectations are so low, it's you're really surprised with the results you get a lot of the times.
I think it's as long as those standards are high too.
Of course.
So we have Pete's book here, which you can't get unless you're a Patreon supporter of his. It's called Enduring Love, because I think there's only 500 copies of the thing. Oh, yeah. But like, it would be great.
It's called Enduring Love, by the way, because love is so difficult to endure. And because that's the thing we haven't got into, is that love is a very difficult. It brings us to the heights, but also the depths. Anyway, keep going.
Well, and the thing that I think about with a book like this, with respect to expectations versus standards, like it'd be really great if all of a sudden it sold 1 million copies, a New York Times bestseller like that. But if that's your expectation going into it, even if you get that, like that's going to feel fulfilling for a moment, but it's going to be fleeting. The standard is like, but can I write a book? By the way, this has a bunch of, it's I guess you would call it like comics or illustrations, but with like all of these little pithy aphorisms, parables, etc., about enduring love. And the standard is like, I'm going to put my best foot forward, knowing that it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. It's not going to be the superhero version. Yeah. But when you talk about living in the moment, I'm going to enjoy doing the actual work of creating this thing.
Yeah. There's an interesting distinction in philosophy and psychoanalysis between pleasure and enjoyment. And so, of course, we use these words interchangeably in everyday life. But you can distinguish them by saying pleasure is the good feeling you get from, say, finishing the book. Mm-hmm. And enjoyment is the pleasure you get, the warm feelings you get from the work itself. Mm-hmm. So at Christmas time, you see a kid waiting for their Christmas presents, and they almost hate it, and they're jumping up and down, having a temper tantrum and all of that. But there's an enjoyment. They can't wait to get the present. That's enjoyment. And then pleasure is the moment that you open the present. Mm. And we all know that the enjoyment is better than the pleasure, right? That's what when you buy a holiday, you're not just buying a holiday, you're paying for the fantasy of the holiday. That's kind of folded into the money. That's why you should never buy a holiday off the cuff. or a lottery ticket. Your $1 isn't for the win. You're paying $1 for the fantasy of the win, right? So, and so we often think that pleasure is the key, the end, but actually we have to find, how do we get a warmth and a depth from enjoyment, which is the struggle.
And that's where love is. Because I think those ephemeral things we mistake for love, but really love is that deep pursuit. Yeah.
I think about, remember Ella on my daughter's 5 now, but when she was 3, for her birthday, I got her a pineapple for her 3rd birthday.
Nice.
And it perfectly illustrates exactly what you're talking about there. There was pleasure in the opening of it, but the enjoyment was the anticipation. She saw it wrapped, and you could tell it was a freaking pineapple. It was a pineapple shaped present, but like the opening, there was this sort of fleeting ephemeral thing, but everything leading up to it, that enjoyment, the anticipation, was really what was memorable of the experience.
And this can get us into actually an interesting critique of contemporary society. And just very quickly, I think for many of us, we have an aim. Oh, if only I had enough money. If only I was able to buy that house. If only I was able to get X, Y, or Z, then I'd be happy. And we're unhappy until we get it.
Right.
And the problem is, if we get the house, then we want 2 houses or 4 houses, or we want to move.
We want a 3rd shower head.
Exactly. Well, I wonder what that would be like. No, I'll have to try that. So what happens is...
we'll have to try that later.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
But the weird thing is, then what happens is, you don't enjoy your enjoyment. It sounds weird to say. You don't enjoy the actual struggle of life, which is where Camus talks about it being the rebel. The rebel, unlike the revolutionary wants an end goal, a utopia, and they're unhappy till they get it.
Right.
The rebel is the one who enjoys the work towards the utopia, realizing that they'll never get there. Yeah. And basically what I'm trying to do with my work is to show that and the only place in America I think this is understood is in sports, right? Because in sports, I noticed this, in American football, right? Nobody ever wins, right? You're watching, people win games, but nobody ever wins American football. Like, there's not a point when they do a Super Bowl, we finally figure out who wins. I guess they're playing for the ball or something, right? So this team wins the ball, then we finish football and we invent another sport, right? it just goes on forever. Every 4 years there's another Super Bowl, or 1 year, whatever. So it's like, it's funny because you go like, oh, sports people understand that actually the real enjoyment of sports is not the wins. If your team wins every game, we all know that becomes very unenjoyable. Yeah. Like, it becomes awful. You want your team to lose, to
want to have the struggle,
to fight.
There has to be a particular tension there. Otherwise, and we talk sometimes about friction, and I think quite often we're looking for this frictionless life, but without friction you have no traction to move forward. You're just sort of slipping and sliding everywhere, and that's no good either.
There was a horror film in the 1970s about this kid in this big building and this psychopath who was terrorizing the kid. And it's a Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, right? And in this crazy show, and obviously Willy Wonka's the devil, right? And
this is the only movie my daughter's ever seen, by the way.
Is that right? Yeah, wow, that's terrifying.
That's one of the scariest. That's scarier than...
She gets really scared by Frozen for some reason, so she just refuses to watch movies now. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, this is truly terrifying because what you discover, he's the devil at the end when he says, when they're in the Wonkavator, because he's very narcissistic guy, so everything's named after him, but he's in the Wonkavator, and he says to Charlie, he says, he suddenly says to him, he gives the curse, he says, don't forget what happened to the kid who got everything he wanted. And Charlie goes, what happened? And then a big evil smile. And Willy Wonka says, he lived happily ever after, right? Now, why is that a curse? Well, there's a beautiful, do you ever watch The Twilight Zone?
Yeah.
There's no Twilight Zone of this bad guy, this criminal gets shot, he dies. He wakes up and there's this guy in a white suit and basically says, I'm here to welcome you to your new life. And the guy pulls out a gun, says, give me all your money. And this guy, Pip, laughs. He says, you can have all my money. In fact, come back to the house. I'll give you even more. Anyway, they go back to this mansion, big mansion. And the guy says, okay, I want to see the money. He says, open that drawer. There's millions. He says, I think you like gambling, don't you? So there's Rocky Valentine's his name. He says, you like gambling, Rocky? Yeah, let's go to the casino. And he wins every game. And anyway, Rocky's going like, this is a bit weird, I think this is the afterlife and this is great. And anyway, Pip goes away, and 2 months later, Rocky Valentine calls Pip up and says, I'm cracking up. He says, I go to the casino and all I do is win. So Pip says, well, what percentage of times would you like to lose? And he's like, no. He says, I'm cracking up. He says, I shouldn't even be in heaven. This is terrible. And of course, it's a Twilight Zone. Pip says, whatever made you think you were in heaven? Yeah. This is hell. And then it says, Rocky Valentine is condemned to live happily ever after. So the idea that if you wanted to climb Everest, then you could immediately do it without the struggle and the training and all that. It would be, and even worse, it would be hell.
Yeah.
A pleasure machine. This is one of the problems. Where there's a thought experiment about if you could have everything you wanted, would that be better than being moral? But the point is, if you could have a pleasure machine, a virtual reality machine that gave you everything you wanted instantly, that would be horrific. That would be terrifying. It's actually the obstacle that really gives us the enjoyment in life.
Well, going back to the football reference, I do fantasy football. So Josh's sport is basketball, mine is American football. And I won last year, and I won with, I think it was 11-1-1. And I was just like, I won those first 10 games or something, going undefeated, and it was boring.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, God, I wish that I get a little bit more competition. But looking back, and when I won, didn't feel that awesome. I mean, it was great because I think you put in $20.
The passing moment.
Yeah, you won $150, and I'm like, great, I'm the best fantasy football player out of these guys. But it's funny because winning didn't make me feel awesome. When I the previous year where I finished second to last, I didn't feel awesome. I was jealous of, the people who were ahead of me. Yeah. But the reason why I play fantasy football is because I love the research. I love digging into injuries and stats. And I mean, there's so much that goes into it than just, picking people and trying to win games. And it, just going back to that pursuit. Yeah. So when I think about that win I had with fantasy football, it's not the win. It's not the winning the whole tournament that makes me feel good. What makes me feel good is that, man, I really did the work, and I did the work. I don't want to say better than other people, and of course, in American football, you get lucky a lot. But so I got lucky a few times. But my point is, though, is when I look back, it's not having that championship win on my belt. It's about that work that I put into it. Because you're right. If I could just sign up for a fantasy football league and then I'm automatically declared the winner, it'd be pointless.
Yeah. There's a philosopher and literary theorist called René Girard, very good theorist, and he has this beautiful story, and basically this sums up something that sounds weird when you first say it, which is when people win all the time, you will generally find that they will self-sabotage. At some point, they'll either become a shoplifter, and you go, why are they shoplifting when they've got everything they want? Or they'll bring out a terrible album whenever they don't have to. And so why is it that success breeds self-sabotage? And René Girard has a beautiful example of a guy in a stony field. And he believes that there is a treasure under one of the rocks. So he goes through the field, always overturning the rocks to find the treasure. And then René Girard says, eventually, this man will seek out a rock so heavy that he cannot lift it. And what René Girard means is he says that when you keep, either missing, not getting what you want, or, you could almost make it a different analogy that under every rock there's treasure, right? Is that you keep getting success, you lose the struggle, you lose the fantasy. So what eventually you will do is you will try to find an obstacle that you cannot get beyond. So making money is a good example. If you give yourself to making money, 1 million, 10 million, 100 million, there's no limit there's no way for an amount of money that fixes it. Right. So eventually what you'll do is you'll set yourself maybe a target or an obstacle so heavy that you'll never be able to reach it because you're frantically wanting to not get what you want. That's what we don't understand. We think we frantically want what we want. No, we frantically want to not get what we want to keep the fantasy alive. So we are in this very difficult position. Schopenhauer called it, he says, human beings oscillate between pain, suffering and boredom. The suffering of not getting what you want and the boredom of getting it. Now, I do believe
pessimist, right?
He's the most pessimistic philosopher you'll ever read. It's very fun to read him. He's very funny.
German?
German pessimist. Very, very good philosopher. Oh, dark. But there is, I believe, a way to get out of this frame. I think what you're doing is a theory and a technology to do that. Sure. Parotheology is what I do, is a theory and a technology to break this frame. But we may not get to how to break it in this session, but at least we can isolate what the problem is, and that's the problem.
Well, it reminds me of what Ryan and I, we were just playing ping pong for our YouTube audience right before this, right when you came in. And
yeah, I was watching.
We ended up tied because they made us stop playing because it was midday and there's apparently ping pong hours downstairs. And anyway, like we're both aggressively mediocre is how I describe our playing at ping pong. But like we are about the same exact skill level, and that's what makes it interesting, because I know that half the time I'm probably going to lose.
Yeah.
I'm the achiever of the relationship, so 51% of the time I win, but I think it's because 1% of the time Ryan sort of lets me. To keep the dynamic going.
I think honestly, I think what happens when we play ping pong, and I don't know if there's a metaphor with this, but usually the person who cares less about that particular game is who's going to lose. Yeah. Because I know that's when I lose, is when I'm like, you know what, I really don't care about this game.
I think it's the opposite. Whenever I care too much about it is when I lose.
Oh, interesting.
You have to hold it with a certain lightness.
Yeah, and I think that actually lends itself to our personalities. With the Enneagram, I'm a 3, and Ryan is a 7.
Yeah.
And Ryan's just very carefree, live in the moment. When everyone else wants to be happy, I'm like, yeah, I want people to be happy as long as I win. But also recognizing the downsides to both of those, right? Yeah. And realizing like, okay, I might have a particular predisposition, but I can climb over the prison walls that I've built for myself as well.
It's interesting, man, because talking about these struggles that people consistently put themselves into, or like self-sabotage, there is some certainty in this, right? Like when I think about people who, family, friends, whoever, reach out to me for help on a regular basis, they experience the same problems a lot. I'm trying to not bash my friends and family, because I'm really not bashing them, but there's this cycle.
About them before we started recording, and they're pretty bad. Yeah.
But the thing is though, is when I look at someone who is constantly self-sabotaging, or they're constantly making the same bad choices, well, there is some control in that. They know the result that they're going to get. They know they're going to fail. So I think that's an aspect of just how important certainty is in our lives. When I think about the journey versus the end goal, it's almost like instead of aiming for success, instead of aiming for the perfect life, instead of aiming for the perfect amount of stuff or whatever it is, it's like we have to really look at the journey we want to choose in our lives. And there's going to be multiple journeys. Yes. I mean, it's not, you just don't choose one journey. And that's, that's a fallacy too. We feel like, we got this one journey and this is what we're going to do and be passionate about the rest of our lives.
I was born to be an astronaut, or I was born to be whatever. Now, do you think that some of those people that you're talking about, friends, family, etc., who do you think maybe they're addicted to the self-sabotage, addicted to the failure?
I think they're addicted to certainty. I think that someone who is constantly self-sabotaging themselves, especially someone who is making the repeated bad decisions, it's the gambling. Yeah. They're addicted to the losing.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes this is fascinating. The term "making love" is a good example of this, right? Because when you think about
love,
by
the way, he is a new film. Is it Patreon supporters to get it soon?
And then it will eventually come out for everybody else. It's called "Making Love."
Yeah, it's called "Making Love." But can you talk about the title, because it's not what people would often think about?
Yes, yeah. There's also a commentary called "A Guide to Making Love" if you want to watch that. So
we'll put a link to "A Guide to Making Love" in the show notes, and you can find all this at his website as well, Peter Rollins.
If you put that in your tags, you'll definitely get a lot more listeners. A lot of more people will search. I realize a lot of people are searching for guides to making love, as I discovered.
This isn't at all what I thought it was.
I know. They're very disappointed. The making love, the phrase is two people don't make love, basically, right? We think that two people make love, but actually you need a third person to make love. Traditionally.
I told you you've been doing it wrong.
This is the mistake you've been making.
And I've been telling Rebecca this every day.
Oh my
Listen,
God.
if you want to give me a call sometime, that's fine. I'll keep my calendar open.
She loves Irish accents. It's not going to work out.
I practice it every day. So, so basically, like the old school idea was you would go on a date and you'd have a chaperone with you, right? And today we think the role of the chaperone is to stop people doing something untoward. But actually, the original role of the chaperone was to get you to start fantasizing about what you could do if the chaperone wasn't there to stop it. So the chaperone was making love, right?
So Ryan, you went through this.
That's great.
You grew up Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, it just totally reminded me of that. Where growing up, they encourage a chaperone on dates because they don't want the kids to fornicate or whatever. So they've got a chaperone there to basically. Because they're not going to start making love in front of this third person. But I totally agree with you. It's like the chaperone. What it's doing is it's putting a restriction.
Yeah.
And when you put restrictions on things, it just makes you want to do them even more. Yeah.
Generate stuff. I mean, here's a great example. In America, you guys created a technology to help young people have sex, and I'm interested in why you did that in the 20th century in a society that's very permissive. Basically, it's a ring that you put on your finger, and it's basically then stops you from having sex. So you basically put it on and says, I will not have sex until I'm married, right? So what that does is it then makes sex really exciting. So then you're more likely to have sex. And I'm like, oh, of course the technology would be invented here, because whenever there's no prohibition, sex becomes boring. If you don't want your kids to have sex, talk about it all the time. Or what did you do? Where did she touch you? Where did he touch you? Here's a diagram. Can you show me? If you do that, your kids aren't going to have sex until
they're late tonight.
Yeah. That's going to put them off for life.
Yeah.
So there's a certain sense in which prohibition and obstacle generates something exciting. And when people self-sabotage, it's often because they're frantically and in an unhealthy way trying to bring obstacle back into existence. That's why a lot of people have affairs. If you take, I know a couple who had an affair, call them Jack and Jill. I think I talked about this in the Rob Bell podcast as well, but basically they were married for a lot of years and the sexual desire had diminished. And they were friends but nothing else. And then he ended up having an affair with somebody else, right? A very brief affair. It was found out. She, the wife, was very upset. He was kind of going like, yeah, well, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. So he got ready to move out. So there you have an example where he's having an affair and he's saying to the woman, if only I wasn't married, we could be together, right? If only I didn't have this and that. Now it's the opportunity. If you're an alien from outer space, you'd be like, oh, they're going to break up. She doesn't like the husband doesn't really like the wife. He wants to be with Snow White color, right? But a week later, Snow White's out of the picture and the husband and the wife are sleeping together again, still annoyed with each other, but having sex and planning a holiday. Now, why is that? Well, partly because in this example, the guy is an obsessive neurotic and the woman's acting as hysteric neurotic. So for an obsessive, the only way to keep desire going is you desire what you don't have. So he was desiring Snow White because he couldn't have her. It's called the object of desire is what you want, and the object cause of desire is what makes you want it, right? So he can't be with Snow White, the object of his desire, because of his relationship. As soon as the relationship ends and he can be with Snow White, he no longer desires her. And then for the woman, she can only desire what is under threat of being taken away. So for her, the object of desire is her husband, the object cause of desire is Snow White. So what happens is this couple is unconsciously, frantically trying to find a way to get their desire going again. And this is the way that it's... And of course, the truth is this has happened about 3 or 4 times, right? This is very common. Now, consciously, it's all a mess. But unconsciously, they're all trying to keep desire alive because desire is what makes us human. Now, of course, there's healthier ways. It motivates us. There are healthier ways to do this, but you've got to understand that, for example, some people you go like, you're very jealous, you shouldn't be jealous. But some people can only love when they're jealous. They can only desire what they're jealous of. So if you got rid of the jealousy, you'd get rid of the desire. All of this is just to say that if you don't find a healthy way of enjoying struggle, if you don't find a healthy way of having antagonism in your relationship, you will find unhealthy ways of expressing that struggle and that antagonism. And the unhealthy ways will destroy you.
I love that, man.
I think I accidentally stumbled into one of these healthy ways in my own relationship. So Rebecca and I spend about every other week apart from each other, and just because of circumstances, she has to go back and forth from Montana because our daughter's biological father is in Montana. So like we spend a considerable amount of time apart. Now we're both introverts, which makes it pretty sustainable for us. But what I've realized in doing that, like there is this tension that builds up, and that week away where I'm like, I can't believe we have to spend this time apart, but it builds up that desire again.
Exactly. The distance is making love.
Yes. Yeah. And so the other thing that came to mind was my mother was a nun before me, and my father was not a priest. She talked to me like it was in her early 20s. It was almost like she decided to go do that instead of like, you know how young men join the military for 4 or 5 years.
She was like, the army.
Well, you didn't
yeah.
join the military back then as a woman back in the 60s, but she just joined the convent and became a nun. And the prohibition on sex was like driving her crazy. She used to masturbate to the statue of Jesus on the crucifix, which was like the strangest metaphor. Like seems like something out of a David Lynch film.
Yeah.
But
there's only 2 mothers I know that would be comfortable enough sharing that information.
I know, that's what
with
I
their
was
son.
thinking as well. I haven't had that conversation with my mom yet.
That's his mom and my mom.
Yeah. Well, my mom was totally fine with communicating about her sex life.
She was very open.
Yeah, she had me late in life too, but so she was very open with those kinds of details. But what you're talking about there is like, in a way, like that's like the sort of the ultimate restriction, putting the veil on, so to speak, quite literally in this case.
And that's where the restriction actually becomes the sexual outlet. And you get this actually within, and I'm not saying this is what your mum's into being a nun, but within the fetish community, where the sex actually isn't the issue, is where the sexuality is in the prohibition. So within fetish communities, often it's prohibition that actually, it's not that the obstacle generates the desire to have sex. The obstacle and sex are intertwined in one.
And
so the object,
cultural prohibition there, like, right? I mean, because part of it is like, well, this is naughty, and that's one of the reasons we're doing it. But then also the prohibition of the act itself, right? Yes. So there's like a double prohibition there.
It's double prohibition, and it's basically prohibition on steroids. It's actually whenever the prohibition becomes the sexual act, right. And that's a whole interesting area in itself. But in religion, you see it as like a lot of mystical experiences are very sexual. If you look at some of the pictures of the mystics, I'm trying to think of, is it Julian of Norwich? There's various female mystics, for example, who it looks like they are having an orgasmic experience in front of the crucifixion. It's a very common kind of thing. Or not very common, but it's a common theme within mysticism. Okay. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating.
I think we should dive into some of these questions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, man.
All right, our first question today is from Britt in Toronto.
Over the years, I've tried to perfect the art of relationships, and I think it backfired because currently I am staying out of relationships because I can't figure out how to break this pattern I have with my partners, where I will do what I can to make them happy, and it gets to the point where they kind of get everything they want and they kind of get sick of it. I think it's kind of similar to eating your favorite dessert every day of the week. It kind of loses its value. You kind of don't want to look at it anymore. Now, I've made sure that I spend time by myself doing my own things. It's very important to be your own person. But what do you do when you get really good at making your partner happy and then you kind of ruin the happiness for them?
So...
perfect. We're always chasing perfect, aren't we?
Yeah, that word is the word that stood out to me. Pete, she says she's trying to perfect the art of relationships, and sometimes that, like, we have this sort of idealized version of something, and also like that not even ideal, but the perfect version, and then of course ideal changes over time too, right? I'm actually reminded of this little New Yorker cartoon that I cut out here. There is a butterfly. And well, for those of you on YouTube, I'm sure Jordan will put this up on the YouTube channel. But the caption at the bottom says, "Look, I still fit into my old caterpillar skin." And like there's this butterfly who's like trying on the past to a certain extent, and as opposed to maybe learning from the past, and so it sounds like there are some lessons to be learned from the past relationships here with Britt. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, that was a brilliant question. Fits so neatly with some of the things we talked about.
Yeah.
If I knew, is Brittany, is that her name?
Mm-hmm.
Brit. If I knew Brit, first of all, I'd be interested to find out if she felt that she needed to be the object for her mother's satisfaction or her father's satisfaction, because sometimes we replay, it's called transference. We take our earliest relationships and we replay them in the present. So if a child feels that they have to satisfy all the desire of their mother or their father, that can play out in how they relate to later relationships. So that's a question for Brit to ask. I don't know what the answer would be, but that's a good question to ask.
That's a great place to start.
Yeah. Because
so let's assume it's father in this case,
right?
And we can go through both scenarios here. What she were to say? Well, yeah, my father.
My father never accepted me. He never really showed me love.
Or I felt like I always needed to prove my adequacy.
He always told me how I was inadequate.
Right.
So
Yeah. Or in a very basic, because this is weirdly one of the things that we have to overcome when we're young, is it's actually can be quite suffocating if our parents actually give us the feeling that we are their everything, and or that we can, if your parents are unhappy, that you think, if I can fill that lack, I can be the object of their desire.
It's an expectation you have to live up to.
And it may not even be the parents that have created it, because it's a very natural thing for us to desire. Yeah. But if we get into that frame of mind, then we think of ourselves as the object of the other's desire, and we're always trying to find a way to fulfill that, and you never can.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why you never can is because people's desires oscillate and change, and a parent who basically makes you think that you are their everything, it just, as I say, causes certain problems in the future. But also then, in terms of the reason why this doesn't work in relationships, is because, as we've just talked about, is we don't want everything. We don't want the other person to try to be everything for us. It's a fantasy, but actually in reality, that extinguishes desire.
We don't want what we think we want.
Yes, that's always a key. And that's why I find it funny when people ask me, even what do you believe? As if we know what we believe. My goodness, we have no idea what we believe. Do you believe, say, in God, or do you believe nobody believes that a duvet cover protects you from a knife attack or makes you invisible to an enemy. But if you hear a creak downstairs, you get all Harry Potter and put it over your head, right? You do believe it, you just don't know it, right? Very few people believe in ghosts until they hear a tapping outside the window, and then they're terrified. So we actually have all sorts of beliefs we're not aware of, and we have all sorts of desires that we're not aware of. So the big thing for Brit is, for me, I would, if I knew her and we're talking to her, be to try to work out whether she has this sense in which she needs to be the object of the other's desire, and that can actually be suffocating for both parties.
So it sounds to me like when she says that she's constantly trying to make them happy, this has caused her to start staying out of relationships now, and that the men that she's with are getting everything they want. What you're saying is maybe that is suffocating them, or if you pan out, it's suffocating the relationship in a way. It's self-destructive. It's not intentionally self-destructive, but maybe it's subconsciously self-destructive.
Well, I know in past relationships where I've had my partner go out of their way to just give me every single thing that I wanted.
I can remember one with you in particular.
And
I obviously won't say the person's name, but it was a great relationship. But
until it wasn't.
Right. It was like, if I just took this water and kept pouring it into your glass, you need more water. It's overflowing.
Yeah.
But it's actually creating a mess.
The other piece of it too is I want to be in a partnership. I want to be a team. I want to live life together. I don't want to have an extension of myself. I don't want to have a third arm or, a second brain that I can attach. I mean, I really want someone who is confident, someone who is willing to stand up for themselves. And to a large extent, that's great that they know what I want, but I want them to know what they want also. So I think the other thing too is with, I don't think it's a relationship you're thinking of. There's another relationship, I definitely won't say the name. I was dating this girl for 3 weeks.
Jessica. No.
Yeah. And her mom called me 3 weeks into it and
Yeah.
was like, so-and-so's really upset right now. And first off, I'm like, your mom's calling me. You're like, her mom's calling me, telling me she's upset. Like, I have no idea where this is going. And she was like, she's really scared that you're going to break up with her. And it's funny because that phone call is what made me break up with her.
There's this, go ahead. I'll let you keep going with it.
I mean, I don't think I really had much more to add there, but just there's a level of immaturity that happens when someone, it's a feeling of immaturity. I'm not saying it is immaturity, but like that example where her mom called me, like, which is perfectly fine. She's sticking up for her daughter. She's worried about her daughter, but like that phone call that her mom calling me and saying, oh, she's worried you're going to break up with her. Like that to me is a feeling of immaturity. It's the same thing with the girl that I think you're thinking about. There is a level of just this feeling of immaturity when someone is constantly giving. They don't know what they want themselves. They just know that they want to give to you as much as they can. Maybe it's not immaturity. It's underdeveloped or not fully developed. Maybe a way of looking at it.
By the way, I think there's a great book called On Being Normal and Other Disorders. And I love the title because...
What a great title.
Yeah, it's a great title because I think that like if you're normal, for example, you do everything right, that's weird. I mean, if you have the job 9 to 5 and you wear the suit and you do everything in a very regimented way, that's a really weird form of mental illness, right? Mm-hmm. So in one sense, we're all messed up in different ways. So yeah, this is just what this person is having to deal with. And because here's the thing, the most precious thing in the world, right? What is the most precious material in the universe? Well,
platinum.
Platinum, exactly. Yeah, there we go. It's desire. What do we desire? We desire the desire of the ones we desire. So what is most important to us?
Sean. That's a minimal maxim
so
right there.
yeah, but it's so true that what we desire is the desire of the ones we desire. That's so important to us. Even when we're fantasizing about being wealthy or being famous, you got to understand that we're fantasizing for somebody else. Who is it? Our mother, our father, our siblings, our enemies at school. Who is it who we would either want them to see us famous or, because they would enjoy it or because they'd hate it, right? Our fantasies are never private. They're always for someone else. It's always good to ask, who are you fantasizing for?
So once we, because it makes me think about my own self where I'm so, like, I've never been happier. I've never felt more purposeful. I really love who I am today.
Someone has to.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I've got mom and dad issues where like I could walk on water and they would, they would have something to say about it.
That water's not wet enough.
Right, exactly. The water's not deep enough.
There's a great Monty Python sketch on that. Yeah, I know, it's right.
But I guess because it's making me do some self-reflection here because I know that there's got to be a piece of that where I'm constantly trying to live up to someone's standards. Now, I have been able to work through and kind of, let go of those expectations, let go of the relationship that I really, really want to have with my mom or the relationship that I really, really want to have with my dad. It's not going to happen. Yeah. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. And I have totally got past that. Mm-hmm. But I guess I don't know how I got there. So I guess what I'm asking you is like, so once someone finds that person that they're really trying to please, how do they... How can they move past that, I guess? Yeah,
and that's the key. So for someone like Britt, I don't know that, because to desire the desire of the one you desire is different from satisfaction. In fact, satisfaction destroys desire. Whenever you give someone everything they want, you get rid of their desire. Then they become, I've got everything I want, right? So what happens unconsciously is maybe, Britt is trying to evoke the desire of the other by thinking that by giving them everything.
And that will provide the satisfaction that is then destroying the relationship.
Yeah. So what you kind of almost have to do is going like, well, Britt doesn't have to change anything. She can still want to give the other person exactly what they want. What do they want? They want desire. So in other words, you have to build in some sort of struggle and impossibility and antagonism into the relationship, but
it can't be too much struggle either.
Yeah,
because it's crazy. Like when going back to the parents who raise someone with everything that they want.
Oh, yeah,
like that's going to create probably not the most developed, or I don't know what word I'm trying to use, a mature person. But the same thing holds true on the other end of the spectrum. If a parent doesn't give a child anything, then that's also going to cause some kind of underdevelopment, immaturity. So there is finding this balance of the healthy desire.
Yeah, healthy tension is really where I was going with that. There's the healthy tension builds the desire, right? I think of the two best relationships I've ever had in my life, the two times where I felt like I've been in love. And one was with Colleen, who I wrote about in Everything That Remains, and like that's exactly what happened. I reached this level of sort of peak satisfaction, and it was this amazing relationship. And if you put the pros and cons on a sheet of paper, you intellectualize the thing, it would have been like, well, of course, this is amazing, and this is going to last forever. And of course, the what left, and I didn't know this at the time, but what left was the desire. And I got to this place where I'm like, almost I felt this the melancholy you described before, where it was like, I got what I want, and this isn't this is satisfying, but that's it, right? And I've lost the desire. In fact, there's this other New Yorker cartoon, the second one I found today, and that was sort of the problem, like doing the if I would have put all the data on the spreadsheet and intellectualized that relationship, and like, well, what's wrong with you? And I this was perfect. There's a lifeguard who's yelling at a person who's drowning in the ocean, right? So we'll show that on YouTube here. But the lifeguard, instead of going to save the person who's drowning, uses a bullhorn, and the caption here just says, "Remain calm and list your goals in order of priority." And like that's you're intellectualizing like a process that requires something that goes deeper than that. That there's this emotion that you're missing from if you just look at the sort of data. It's like looking at a rainbow in grayscale.
It's so for me, what that cartoon represents is sometimes, like you can read every single Tony Robbins book that you want. You could read every, self-motivating book that's out there, but sometimes people are legitimately drowning, and they just need to put aside the self-help for a second and just focus on getting above water. Yeah. And metaphorically, like, it's easy, but for in practice, it's going to be a little different for everyone who kind of feels like they're drowning.
So maybe what do we do to sum up Britt's question here? What do we do to inject that healthy tension into a relationship?
Yeah. Okay, that's difficult. By the way, just one thing on the self-help stuff, which I love, is grace, I think, is in a sense the great opposite of self-help.
How do you define grace?
So grace, I use Paul Tillich, I think, said it very well, which is to accept that you're accepted. So it's not a religious term or anything like that as such. It is merely a sense in which you're able to you experience an acceptance of yourself. In other words, self-help is going like, take step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. Grace is this weird moment that we get very occasionally where you go, I don't have to judge myself, condemn myself. I can face myself. And the weird thing is when you are able to make space for yourself, that real change can happen. Like in AA, before you do the 12 steps, there's step 0. And step 0 is grace. It's where you sit in the room where people accept you and don't ask you to change. And you can be honest with yourself. And weirdly, only when you can do that can you make progress. So for Britt or me or you guys, anybody, the first experience is to go, I've got ghosts, as in I've got things that I've repressed. A ghost is the presence of an absence. So we're all haunted houses. We've got ghosts of those we've loved and lost, those we've hurt, those who have hurt us. And the first thing is to go, I need to look at those ghosts, because there's like, for obsessives, they're condemned to, as soon as they get to know somebody, they stop desiring them. So a typical obsessive, they can only desire what they don't have. But a typical hysteric can only desire when they give themselves up completely, when they disappear. So someone who always brings gifts all the time, give themselves completely to their kids to the point that they disappear entirely. And those are two very damaging forms of relating to the world. And I think the first step for anybody is to stop and to go, why is it that I am afraid of myself, or I'm afraid of encountering the other? And that's grace. And it's very hard to find. It's very hard to experience that. Yeah. But
and then what do we do to build in some tension here?
Healthy tension.
I think it's first recognizing the need for it, because quite often we want to eliminate it. Like anytime there's any friction at all, it's like, get this out of here. I want this to be ideal. I want it to be perfect. I want it to be Stepford.
Yeah.
But that's when the satisfaction overwhelms you until you're no longer satisfied.
Exactly. Like, well, here's the thing. I would love to see a marriage, right, where, because here, how do you make an engagement romantic, right? Because everybody's trying to do it, like fireworks and get a, a ring and a pie, or I don't know, whatever.
Look how much debt I have for this wedding.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Right. But I understand that we're frantically trying to make engagements romantic because we've taken the one thing away from engagements that makes it romantic. The most romantic thing about an engagement is that to be engaged is utterly ridiculous, terrifying, and horrifying, right? The idea that you would impose yourself for life on somebody you like is horrible. I mean, that's disgusting. To think that you would impose yourself, not even an enemy, but someone you actually care about. And secondly, most marriages don't work, right? Even the ones where people don't separate are usually a disaster.
Right.
Now, I think this is what makes marriage wonderful. Because imagine you're about to get married and I say to you, I am from the future, and in the future you guys break up and it's a disaster. In fact, I've even got a DVD or whatever memory stick with the moment that you guys break up. So it's not even, statistically probable. I'm saying it's going to be a disaster and you're going to use your kids to fight among each other. If you then turn around and say, yeah, but I want to do it anyway, that's love, right? So in one sense, I want a marriage which kind of where the pastor says, you're doing something utterly ridiculous. This is insane. The probability is within 5 or 10 years, you won't just dislike each other, you'll hate each other more than you hate anybody else in the world. And that's what makes it beautiful, because you're willing to take that risk. You're willing to jump into it 100%. Yeah. But that kind of marriage rarely happens in our society because the marriage is seen as the goal and it's not the struggle, but kind of the achievement of the end. So for all of us Brits, how do we ritualize? The reason why I'm using a marriage is because a marriage is a ritual that is designed to embody a mode of existence. So how do we find rituals that actually help us to understand that relationships are a struggle, are a nightmare, are probably well worth avoiding, and that's why you should jump into them. Brit said she's taking some time out. That's fine. We all need to do that. Yeah. But you know what? She's already had the insight. She's had the insight that relationships are a nightmare. Now she just needs to take the second step and go, and that's why they're worth jumping into.
And you have to endure the love.
Yeah. And this is the comic, but the graphic novel, is all about it, because it's a set in the Lonely Forest. A place called the Lonely Forest. It's very close to the 100-acre wood, but lesser known. And it's all of these little animals who are trying to endure love. They are trying to endure the sufferings and the joys of love. It's very dark and depressing, but it's to show that love is so difficult to endure, and yet love is what brings a depth and a density and a complexity to our existence.
The relationship I'm in right now with Rebecca is the most difficult relationship I've ever been in, and it's also the best relationship I've ever been in. Part of it has to do with just pre-existing circumstances. We both bring baggage to the table, obviously, because we're in our mid to late 30s, and so like you come to the table with your own past, right? And instead of trying to ignore that, you recognize it, and you can even celebrate it in a way that says, okay, I am perfectly imperfect. I'm all of these pieces. I'm giving what I don't have to someone who doesn't want it, but you're willing to take it anyway. Yeah. And you're willing to endure this relationship. Otherwise, like it's just perfect, and I'm gonna hate it.
So we have given Britt the most perfect answer right now. She's gonna dive back into these relationships. What happens when the next one fails? How do we encourage her to embrace the failure?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough. I mean, how do you endure the horror of love? How do you cope? How do you find life after death? Yeah, the only thing I can say, and I don't believe this, but it is that when you're
I just know it to be true.
Yeah, that's probably a nice way to put it.
That is good. Tweet that.
Is that thankfully we can all change the past. This is a wonderful thing. Is that it's also terrifying, but it's not just that we can.
Are you talking about deleting old tweets?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I've got a DeLorean. We can not only can we influence the future, we can change the past. And what I mean by that is, if someone is in the darkest despair, and for 20 years they have been in the darkest despair and they haven't met anybody, and they're like, I've just wasted 20 years of my life. if you meet somebody, for example, it can rewrite the past. Suddenly the past is this waiting period for this moment. It becomes the Old Testament prophecies of this event in your life. And it reprograms and recodifies the past. And so what I always want to say to people is, in the pits of despair, I know it's hard to believe, but when you find something that you love in the present, it can also recodify and transform the past. So your past is never unredeemable. In fact, your past is always redeemable. You have not lost anything. But so that event will not just change your future, it will change your past. So keep going, keep open.
Yeah.
And it's tough.
Man, I've ADD. I got two thoughts going on. Well, just to bounce off of what you were saying, the interview you did with Rob, I think it was in the part 1 episode, where you talked about how that past sometimes it creates this barrier. It prevents us from like loving fully, and like just letting go of that past it's the scariest thing, but it's something that is so necessary for us to move forward. The other thought I had too is, this conversation actually is really helping me feel good about failure, not just with love, but with anything. And as we're sitting here talking, I was kind of thinking to myself, is there anything in life that we get and we are just ecstatic that we got it and we're so happy, but we didn't lift a finger for it?
Yeah.
Is there anything that we get in life that comes without the friction that's worth having? I mean, maybe there is. I mean, there's probably someone watching this or listening to it, and they're going to say, oh, yeah, I won the lottery, and I'm really happy. Yeah. Which is funny, because most lottery winners aren't happy. But anyway, I guess I'm positing that question. Is there anything you can think of, Josh, that we get without any friction, and we're so happy we got it?
I think the lottery would just destroy most people. And because it's the opposite of what you're talking about. Yes, but my answer to you is yes, but they're all things that still come with tension and turmoil. Like, I mean, they aren't things at all, right? It's not objective reality. It's subjective reality. We get life, and that makes me really happy that I'm alive.
But life is a lot of work,
and it's a lot of struggle and a lot of pain.
I was thinking the closest thing I could think of is when I was a kid. I just remember you have these moments when, as you're growing up, like, oh, I can't wait until I can, throw a football like so-and-so, or I can't wait until I can ride a bike like so-and-so. And you have these little moments that you do get growing up. I mean, that is, for all intents and purposes, even then, right? I was going to say riding a bike. Even then, I can't tell you the amount of pain I'd put through myself. I put on myself to learn how to ride a bike. But even growing, let's just say the act of growing up as a child, you still have growing pains.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Even if you get something like a glance of a stranger, you're walking down the street and there's a glance of a stranger, and that glance for some reason lightens your day. So you can say, well, that came without friction. That was a gift from the other without friction. But even then, there's a whole pile of reasons why you needed that glance.
Yeah.
Why that glance. So yeah, it's hard to imagine something that comes to us without a history, a prehistory.
Yeah.
My friend Phil Harrison wrote his debut novel recently I think it's called The First Day. He has a great line, and I think he might have taken it out of the book, but he said, the line is, one of the characters says, none of us gets what we want, but you cannot get what you want in different ways. And it's a beautiful line, because he goes like, yeah, there's better and worse ways of not getting what you want, right? There's failures that are terrible, and there's failures that are good. Yeah. And actually, and Beckett says this, but there's a certain way in which what we want is the better ways of not getting what we want. We find the ways of enjoying our failures and in a positive kind of way.
Totally.
Man, I think the biggest piece of advice for Britt here is embrace the healthy friction, or embrace the healthy tension. Yeah, you could tweet either of those, Sean. Those are good too. All
right, well, Britt, I'm going to send you a copy of our book, Everything That Remains, since I talked about it, and there's a whole chapter in there about the second best relationship of my life. At the time, it was the best relationship of my life, and how I ruined it.
Is she still in your top 5 on MySpace?
On MySpace.
Here's one thing.
Everything That Remains. We'll send you an audiobook version of that.
I want a copy as well.
Yeah, we'll send you a copy. I'll give you a copy. I don't have to send it to you. You're right here.
Yeah, I'm right here. I'll take it with me. If I don't believe you that you'll send it to me if I leave this place.
Yeah, checks in the mail.
Whatever. Yeah. But there's that phrase that says, a society that doesn't know its history is condemned to repeat it. But that's true for us as individuals as well. We will continue to make the same mistakes that we made in our childhood, and actually to know your history is to maybe break out of it and not repeat it. So if someone like Britt or anybody else, we repeat the past in our present relationships when we don't know it. But if you can begin to get to know your past, it actually helps you free you from it. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Totally, I
love it.
I think that quite often we put this sort of veil over the past and say, I don't want to dive into that. I was actually talking to my therapist about this yesterday, about how because he was asking me about like what are the things you don't confront in your past, and thankfully there was many things for the first 30 years of my life, but then I started writing about the things, and it's cathartic, but not in a way that's pleasurable. You have to like dig up some demons from the past in order to slay them. Anyway, so that is a way of changing the past, right? By confronting it. So Britt will send you a copy of Everything That Remains. If you like the podcast, you'll like the audiobook version, or if you want the book or the ebook version, podcast Sean, if you could reach out to her and send that to her, I would be grateful. Our next question is from Justin in Cleveland.
There was a woman that I was in a relationship with who brought me immense value, and I loved her very dearly. But she broke up with me. So I wanted to know, when is it time to move on and say the relationship is over? And when is it still a time to continue to pursue that relationship?
So yeah, it's interesting. The language that he's using to posit this question. So this woman broke up with him, and of course, I want to put this caveat out there. I mean, obviously, no is no, and if someone breaks up with you and they don't owe you anything. They don't owe you an explanation. They don't owe you an hour of their time to let's try to work this out. They don't owe you.
I
coffee
totally agree.
Together.
When someone tells you no, you should respect it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Now, that said, also, Justin, sorry for your loss. Like, this is obviously a huge loss for him, so I want to empathize a little bit with him.
Yeah, and I think that the other language he used here is, when is it time to move on, and he used give up. And I would just say that now is the time to move forward. Now, does that mean moving on or giving up? I don't know. Pete, I heard you talk about this once. Like, sometimes when you get into an argument with your significant other and someone says, get out of here, they don't actually mean get out of here sometimes, too. There is the literal meaning, but then there is this sort of, there is a figurative meaning behind get out of here. It also means stay and let's work this out in a way.
And language is a complicated thing. And Justin, I've been in a similar place, and so many of us have been, and it is deeply devastating. One of the things I would say is what the danger that happens when you break up with someone is that the very breaking up changes the dynamic to such an extent that you start to fantasize that the other person could fix everything. So what happens is, often when a breakup happens, the person isn't just somebody really nice that you could have had a good life with. The person starts to become, in your unconscious fantasies, the one that would fix you entirely.
The one. I think that's the key too. Our friend Colin Wright has a great book called Some Thoughts About Relationships, and he has these different chapters in there, and one of them is about not looking for the one. Like the whole Jerry Maguire thing, you complete me, is like. In fact, I think in the book he's like, you want to look for the person that incompletes you.
Yes.
That you incomplete me is the more realistic.
Because really, when you say you complete me, it's you complete me for right now.
Well, but also it presupposes that you are not a whole person by yourself, and that you need someone else in order to fill in this inadequacy that you currently contain.
And I'm very existential, so I avoid even the wholeness words, but we don't really have to get into that. But here's the problem. I would say that psychoanalytically, we are all very susceptible to the notion of the one. You see it in philosophy, the one is the absolute or God. In LA, there's the tyranny of happiness. The one is fame or money or looks. So we are very prone to it. And the reasons are because it's what's called the drive. We have this drive for something that will complete us. We all have that temptation. And so in this environment, for Justin, this woman can take that spot, and there's no easy way out, except sometimes it'll be a bit of psychotherapy or whatever. But eventually you get to the point of going, maybe it would have been a good relationship. Maybe it would have been a great relationship. Maybe we would have had a wonderful life together. But it wouldn't have completed you. Right. That what's happened is she's become an idol. She's become a figure that is so absolute that you will not be able to enjoy your life.
So what's the alternative to an idol then?
Yeah, kind of in one sense, to break the idol, very gradually, you kind of need to break this fantasy of the one. And it's very hard to do, to break this fantasy. And it does mean for Justin, he may, as I say, go, she's amazing. That would have been fantastic. Mm-hmm. But it's also going, but you know what? I have other possibilities, other life opportunities, other things will open up. But it can take years to get to that point. You know, it's really tough. Yeah. And because you're not consciously making the person the one, you're unconsciously doing it. So no matter how much you consciously try to not do it, you're fighting your unconscious, and your unconscious is much stronger than your conscious.
Now, what about this language of giving up? I mean, the thing, I remember a particular relationship I was in. It was with the woman who threw scissors at me. And we won't go into any details, but there was a time where we got into, like, I'm not prone to fighting, and I take things very literally. When you know, she's like, get the F out of here, and I'm like, okay, I'm walking out. She's like, where are you going? And I'm like, you just told me to leave. Like,
threw scissors at me. Yeah,
I'm leaving. This is before the scissors incident ended everything. But yeah, it's like, get out of here. And I'm like, okay, like, I respect what you're saying. Goodbye. And then she's like, well, where the hell are you going?
Well, it's funny because, like, what she and I know who you're talking about in their personality, and you know, she might have thrown that out there, get out of here, but really she wanted you to fight for her.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I don't know if that's healthy or not, but there are some women who like to be chased. There are
men too.
Yeah, and I don't really.
I think men especially.
Yeah.
Because we can often be, achiever, and for me, like, significance is a big drive for doing what I do, right? Like, and so I have to keep that in mind. Like, the question you asked earlier, like, who am I doing this for, right? And like, who am I trying, if I were to reposit that question, who am I trying to be significant for? Yeah. And then why? Yeah. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about that. Maybe we could talk about these sort of the language behind the language.
Yeah. I mean, and this is the core of language itself. Whenever in America, there's a philosopher, Zizek, talked about this, and I've experienced it myself. In America, you guys say, how are you doing? I think it's whenever you go into a shop, people will say, are you having a good day or whatever? And at first it's very weird because you're like, oh, well, thanks very much for asking. Well, I just had an argument with my mom, and my sister's been like, I was in hospital, and and then you realize, no, they're not asking you that, right? I'm being an idiot. They're not asking you, how's your day going? They are showing that they're there, they're making a connection. So you guys from America know that, but I don't. Back in Ireland, we always refuse food twice before the third time. So if I come round to your house and you say, would you like some food? I'll always go, no. And then first time in America, I did this. I said, no, I couldn't eat a thing. And the person said, okay. And I'm like, how rude. Like, that is like unbelievable, right?
For them not to offer 3 times.
So you go like, do you want some food? I go, no, I really couldn't. Oh, no, seriously, have a sandwich. No, I honestly couldn't eat a thing. No, please have a sandwich. Yes, I'm famished, right? That's the thing. So again, there's an interesting thing that in every society there are the rules and the meta rules.
Right.
And when you go into a new society, you just know the rules, you don't know the meta rules. This is one way of always knowing if someone doesn't fit. So if you go to a high class dinner and the person does everything right, well, you know that they don't fit. Because to be in a high-class dinner is to know when to obey the rules and when to disobey the rules. If someone obeys all the rules, it's obvious that they're trying too hard. Right? So, I've got lots of examples of that. But so even whenever I say to you, I want you to leave, I might be saying I want you to fight to stay if you're in a relationship. And it's very difficult to write the meta rules. The meta rules are this shared set of rules that a culture or a community kind of know. and that someone outside the community is completely oblivious to.
And that community in this case could be just the two people. It could be just
Yes.
that relationship. You might have your own meta rules.
You have your own meta rules, and very, people who are very kind of psychotic or have psychosis of sorts, they're very literal. So whenever they go to a party, they find the party completely bizarre because everybody is lying, saying how are you doing, but they're not asking how you're doing, and they're all of these. They know the rules, but they don't know the meta rules, and so parties are this weird space where everybody's lying, but of course everybody's not lying. People are just know the meta rules.
Yeah.
So that it's an interesting thing about language. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
well-
by the way, also indirect communication. The most direct way to speak is indirectly, i.e., if I say to you, I want you to leave, well, I want you to stay, but how do I find out? I only find out if I say I want you to stay, then you can stay even if you don't want to, right? But if I say I want you to leave and you go, no, I really want to stay and work this out, then I get to the truth. That's the difference between a parable and a command, right? If I'm in the army and I say it's cold in here, close the door, right? Close the door. You have to obey me. I'm giving you a command. You have to do it.
Right.
But if I go, oh, it's chilly in here. If you're a nice person, you'll close the door. If you're not, you won't, right? And so a parable speaks to the heart. A command speaks to the mind, and a lot of language has to be parabolic. It has, in order to find out something, you can't speak directly.
Yeah. I think that in Justin's case here, I mean, you have to take literally if she's like, hey, we're done, but then also there. Not knowing how long you've been in this relationship, there probably is some meta language here that you have to know whether or not you are moving on. Is this worth one more shot? Is it worth one more discussion? And you have to respect if she says, well, no, I don't want to have any more discussions. I'm going to block your phone number or whatever, or we just need some time apart. You can still approach that literally in a way and say, hey, look, I realize what you're saying to me. Would it be possible to sit down? Would you be willing to? Those 5 words that change everything for me. Would you be willing to sit down with me for half an hour so we can talk about this rationally? And afterward, if you want to walk away, totally understand that.
There is a messiness, yeah. I mean, and it's difficult because we all know there's a messiness to relationships. And so there's a way, if someone says, for example, no, we've broken up, there's a messiness there, but there's a way to respectfully do it. For example, you don't stalk. Stalking is where you basically then don't take no for an answer, right? But there's another thing, which is where you send a letter, and in the letter you say, listen, this is how I feel, this is where we're at. And that's a bit messy because the person said, like, maybe I don't want to ever talk to you again, and you've disobeyed it because you've sent them a letter. That's not stalking. Stalking is where you are refusing the no. Writing a letter isn't a bad thing. Now, writing 100 letters, if they don't
sending
respond
100
to it,
texts,
yes,
yeah.
100 texts a month,
Even if that's the other person's expectation, then they have really poor expectations.
Yes,
where for me, like the relationship I'm talking about, where she was like, "Get the hell out of here," and I'm like, "Okay," like that was honestly the best thing to do in retrospect as well, because like she literally wanted to stay and fight, and like it was an unproductive. It wasn't like stay and fight for me, it was stay and fight with me.
Yes. 'Cause there is a structure that's very painful for people who have it, where they can only maintain their desire through conflict, through jealousy, through fighting, and that can be very taxing on a relationship, unless the two people like it, and then it kind of can work okay. But sometimes they have to generate conflict. Not because they like the conflict, but because the conflict is what allows them to maintain their desire. But if you're not that type of person, I'm not that type of person, and that type of relationship is just going to drain you. Whereas if actually two people, I know a couple and they're very fiery and they're always arguing and all that, but it's like they both love it. And I look at it and go, oh my goodness, that would be exhausting to me. I couldn't do it. But they're
in it for the fight.
They're in it for the fight and they love it. And they're like, and I honestly, first time I met them, I was like, oh, this is a bit heavy. They're having this conflict over the dinner table. And then as I hung out with them, I was like, oh no, they love each other so much and they get so much out of this tension. So
that's how they define passion in a way for them. Whereas for someone else, for me, that would wreck a relationship. And so you have to figure out the rules and the meta rules of a relationship in order for it to work. I was going to send Justin a copy of Essential, our essay collection. There's a chapter of about relationships in there. But actually, since we talked about Colin's book, Sean, if you could reach out to Justin and see if he would like a copy of both of those. Our book Essential which is an essay collection, 150 different essays about intentional living, one chapter about relationships in there. But then Some Thoughts About Relationships by Colin Wright is a great book. He has these different policies about not just the intimate relationships in our lives, but how to better navigate our everyday relationships, whether they're business relationships, friendships, acquaintances, etc. So if you could reach out to him and give him the book or the audiobook version of those, I would appreciate it.
So with Justin, if he has already put in this healthy pursuit, and she's not giving you anything back, you got to let it go. But the other thing too I want to tell Justin is, really look at, because she may or may not have done this for him. I mean, he didn't say, but I'm going to assume she gave him a little bit of feedback, like, no, I don't want to be with you because of X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm. Either directly or indirectly.
Right. And Justin can look in the mirror, and then this is what I think he should do. He should look in the mirror and say, you know what? She's right. X, Y, and Z, I do need to focus on, and that's an area that I've always had a problem with. And then, start having those, short-term actions align with those long-term values and beliefs.
Although it might not, it may just be that she didn't like those
things.
That is
correct.
That's the thing. Like generally one person's problem is another person's desire. So for example, if for argument's sake, somebody might say, you're too passionate or whatever, you fly off the handle too quickly. But then there's some people out there going, no, I want that. So, the big thing for me for Justin is, and I guess he has let it go as in physically, as in, but I'm guessing he's more talking emotionally. Mm-hmm. How do I let go in my mind? Mm-hmm. And I think what you're saying is very important, which is, I think to let yourself feel everything, to let yourself feel like, don't run away into other pursuits, into work or into things. There's the beautiful phrase in graveyards which says "gone but not forgotten," which means someone's died, but that you remember them. But in psychoanalysis, there's a notion of the forgotten but not gone, which is where you try to forget something, but it remains within you and it tears you apart.
It's that psychological residue we were talking about a moment ago, where you pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
You keep eating, the soup, even though there's a turd in it. You're like, this kind of tastes like shit, but you just keep eating it over and over and over, and you try to pretend it's not there, but it's going to be there until you deal with it.
So going with the shit stew example, what I was getting at is that with Justin, he can maybe look in his stew and be like, you know what, she's right, there's a piece of shit in this stew. Or maybe he looks in the stew and he's like, no, this is actually really good stew, and I really, really love this stew. And even though she feels that way, I guess what I'm really trying to give advice to Justin here is maybe there is something you have to change, maybe, but ultimately if he can look in the mirror and be like, no, I really love who I am, and I don't know why she broke up with me and whatever reasons it was, and I really don't agree with her, but I really do love who I am. Well then, Justin, you've got to find someone who loves you for who you are, and she didn't love you for who you were. That's okay.
Yeah, but the issue is if you can't do that, that's the trick for me. Is sometimes we can't
do what?
Can't move on. And that's very important for all of us. It's not that because there's consciously, what you conscious advice, and then there's what the unconscious wants, and that's why I'm always actually very skeptical of advice, because advice always talks to consciousness when we have to shift the unconscious. And so how does if Justin, for example, is he wants to move on, he wants to forget, but he can't. What does he do? And that's where I think this trying to just feel everything and maybe get therapy where you talk through everything and you bring it all to the surface, and that process can be enough to break that psychic link.
It might help you. It might be the thing that helps you move on by bringing it to the surface, and yes, you're letting it go in one sense. But it will follow you for a while, and
or
even as you move forward.
Kill her cat and burn all her stuff and burn all the photographs of you. That's the other option. So the other option is to try to feel your thoughts and mourn and move on.
Or to project your thoughts.
Yes, yeah. Or just go crazy.
All right, y'all, we'd love to hear what you have to say. So if you have a comment or tip about love, including advice for any of our callers today, leave us a voicemail, 406-219-7839. You can also email a voice memo right from your phone to podcast@theminimalists.com. We'll air our favorite comments and tips on a future episode. And stay tuned to the end of this week's episode for this week's listener comments and tips. Ryan, what time is it?
It is time for our lightning round, where we answer questions from social media.
All right, Pete, this is what we do here. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Minimalists, and Pete is at Peter Rollins on Twitter. He has my favorite Twitter bio of all time, I think. I wrote it down. It says, "We'll give nihilistic despair for cash." and then it says, "Tweets do not reflect opinion of my employer. Self-employed."
That's great. That's great.
So yeah, you can follow at Peter Rollins on Twitter. But during the lightning round, this is where Ryan and I and now Pete, we do our best to answer each question with just a short, shareable, less than 140 character response. We put the text of
Is it
these.
180 characters now?
It's 280
It's
now.
280
but,
now.
But we're fundamentalists.
All right, you're
Twitter
sticking with
fundamentalists.
140. Okay.
Speaking of, so Pete has a great podcast with his roommate called The Fundamentalists. He's reclaimed the word fundamentalist.
Yeah.
So your roommate is a comic.
Yeah.
And I think it's weekly. You put out a podcast episode most weeks.
Mostly.
Yeah.
We're not the most organized guys. Like, I'm looking at your setup and I'm like so in awe of it. Like, we sit in our pajamas drinking whiskey.
Well, if you ever want to come by and use
talking.
the set here, I think it would take
Yeah.
away some of the beauty of it. You talked about this on a recent episode where you were talking about the sort of issues that you had with Malcolm Gladwell talking about stand-up comedy, and I really loved the episode because what's your roommate's
Elliot.
Elliot, yes, yeah. You and Elliot were talking about how Malcolm Gladwell made this very declarative statement, like how stand-up comedy is one of the easiest jobs in the world, because, and I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but basically he was saying that, hey, it's so easy because you're showing up and telling jokes in front of drunk people who expect to hear jokes, and I think the beautiful détente that you sort of formed with this conversation is like, Malcolm Gladwell was both right and wrong. Part of it is like stand-up comedy is really difficult, and because it's difficult, you have to put yourself in this situation where people are coming and expecting to laugh in a way,
And it's only as difficult as telling the truth. So, which is incredibly difficult.
Yes.
I know. But here's one thing: like, I virtually know no one who can tell the truth, except your truth always speaks. Your truth will speak in the tapping of your finger. That's what Freud said, or the twitch in your eye. So everyone is always telling the truth, but also we are avoiding confronting the truth. And so the comedian often is trying to articulate a truth that's very difficult. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, in that episode, you were talking about also how why when YouTube stars start to become famous, they actually lose the thing that made them so fascinating, because they were just like everyone else, and then all of a sudden they're no longer in their bedroom singing the cover song. They're Shawn Mendes performing in front of 50,000 people at a stadium in Dublin or something, and all of a sudden they're not that same person that you fell in love with. It's like when Radiohead became famous, and everyone's like, yeah, but everything went downhill after OK Computer, because all of a sudden they're this.
They were cool for not being cool, but now they're cool, which makes them uncool.
Yeah.
Well, you guys,
Tweet that. Wait a minute.
This is in relation to this, like, you're my pleasure and my enjoyment is not having it, because I'm looking at your setup and I'm like, you're my ideal. You're like you've got a room, you've got really good mics.
But if you got
I really want to take one of these mics.
You'd be so unhappy though.
But yeah, I'd be so depressed. But in my head, I would be happy. So I'm going to go back to Elliot and go, Elliot, we need a good setup.
To your point, like, so we just had the Today Show. We just did a Today Show interview on the Megyn Kelly show, and we were going to film at Josh's place, but there was some kind of issue filming his place. But his place is so much like, he actually looks like a minimalist when he walks. Where me and my partner, you walk in, you're like, oh, these guys are like really tidy. I mean, Josh is really tidy too, but specifically with design is what I mean by you would walk in and be like, oh, maybe this guy's a minimalist because of the specific design.
I have like aesthetic OCD.
And I look and I go to Josh's place. I'm like, God, this place is like so nice. But if I had this, I'd be miserable because I would have to take care of it. I would have to make sure everything was always in its place, and it would drive me, because I am not OCD, I am ADD. But to your point, it's like, I would love for my place to look like Josh's. I just don't want to make my place look. Actually, can you just come over and like decorate and tidy up for me once a week?
Tidy up.
Back to your point, anything that's given to you will not make you happy.
That's absolutely true.
All right, so for the lightning round, we actually just maunder on a bit, so don't feel like you have to create something 140 characters. Eventually, we come up with something that's tweetable. Ryan, you want to get to our first question here?
All right, our first lightning round question is from Mystery Girl. Is that really her name, Mystery Girl?
It was her Twitter name, yeah.
Nice.
It's a cool Twitter name.
It is a
I
cool
like
Twitter
that.
name.
It's like a superhero,
It is.
superheroine name.
I thought maybe like someone like anonymously asked a question or something.
Oh, no.
All right, Mystery Girl's question is, what do you recommend to someone who doesn't really know how to love herself?
Well, my pithy answer to this, and maybe we could talk about it, is internal clutter gets in the way of love. Thus, to love ourselves, we must let go of that which is in the way. Emotional clutter, psychological clutter, spiritual clutter, mental clutter, existential clutter. Pete, we often talk about the material possessions in our life, like in American life in particular, but Western society in general. But we even had people from Afghanistan and Kenya email us, natives of those countries, who are like dealing with this struggle with external clutter. And so what I've learned is part of the human condition is like there's this the material possessions are a physical manifestation quite often of what's going on inside us, right? And so quite often it starts with dealing with that stuff. But once you deal with that, then all of a sudden you have to start looking inward in a way.
Yeah.
So Mystery Girl's question is about like, what do you recommend to someone who doesn't know how to love herself?
Yeah.
I'll go first. So the short answer I got here is the more your shirt. Good grief! I promise.
Your shirt does what?
I promise I can talk. The more your short-term actions align with your long-term values, the more love and respect you'll have for yourself.
I think isn't that quite the problem sometimes, is like we get down on ourselves, but then we realize, and then it becomes this like perpetual cycle too. Like I'm not doing what my future self would want me to do right now. I mean, the obvious example is like someone who's a smoker. Like, your future self probably doesn't want your current self to smoke.
You're gonna wake up the next morning and be like, "Why did I go back to the cigarettes?"
Yeah.
What? Yeah. We beat ourselves up. I mean, that is, to me, like that is that's kind of the human existence. It's like you talked about. There's where we're at and where we want to be.
Yeah.
And it's funny though, if I ever got to where I wanted to be, if I ever got to that perfect state, I feel like I'd be really bored.
Yeah.
Like I feel like if there's not any more challenges, then life would be really, really boring. So, I mean, in another way, I guess I'm recommending to Mystery Girl is embrace the challenge of loving yourself and embrace the journey of finding different ways to do that. But I know for me, when I hated myself the most, or when I looked in the mirror and I felt like I was letting myself down the most, it's when my short-term actions were not aligning with those values. So, for example, it's like I really wanted that, mid-level corporate job. I wanted to manage, hundreds of people, and I really wanted that. Well, to get there was a lot of values I had to compromise. I mean, teaching my guys how to teach their guys to sell cell phones to 5-year-olds, and trying to play the corporate politics. And I mean, there's just so many things where I look back, I just forsook a lot of value so I could finally get this thing that I wanted. And then when I got it, it was a completely different feeling than what I thought I was going to get.
Yeah.
So do you have anything pithy for Mystery Girl if she doesn't love herself?
Yeah. Now, first of all, these guys had practice. They even wrote down their answers. I am hearing it off the cuff. So I'm going to make my way to a pithy answer pretty quick.
I love it.
Pretty quick. So two problems people have often when we're growing up is we create what's called an ego ideal, which is like whenever your parents say you're strong, you're beautiful, whatever, which is very important. But, you start to create this ideal of yourself that you love, which is called narcissism. You start to fall in love with this ideal. There's another issue is sometimes when you don't relate to that ideal, you put it onto other people. So you start to idolize stars, writers, musicians, which is a weird thing of like putting your ideal ego into other people. So these are two issues: is you love the ideal of yourself, or you love the ideal of yourself in another person. Okay. See it all the time. The difficulty is how do you confront all of your shadow, your darkness, all of those things, and how do you find a space for them? And it sounds like Mystery Girl is, that's the question she's asking. She's saying, like, I don't have that ideal ego that I'm loving, which is a very good thing. So you're already halfway there, Mystery Girl. You don't have to overcome that. Yes. I don't know if you idealize other people, but it sounds like maybe not. But so the question is then, how do you come to accept your whole self in its darkness and light. And the pithy answer, this is my Twitter answer I got there, and it's very twee, but it's finding a collective of grace, which is to try to, there's a long answer, but the short answer is where is it that you feel that people can accept you for who you are? Is it the coffee shop? It could be the confessional, the poker room, the pub, wherever it is. Where is that liturgical space where you're able to allow yourself to feel the full range of human emotions, from happiness to sadness to self-hatred to self-love, all of the human emotions that are there, and just make space for them in your life? If you don't have that space, try to find it, and it's hard to find.
I love it.
Find the space where you can be yourself, as opposed to having to always try to be that idealized self that you're projecting onto the world.
Which is grace, because grace isn't being accepted, because I can accept you, but you don't accept that you're accepted. So the first step is go to a place where you're accepted, and then very gradually you will accept that you're accepted. So it doesn't happen straight away. You enter a collective where you're accepted, and then over months or years you will accept that you're accepted, and then you will be able to love yourself in a healthy way.
Absolutely. I have an aside written down here, and it says, don't let others' opinions make you think less of yourself. Get those people out of your life. I mean, you could tweet that too, Sean, but the point is like, right now, does she not love herself because there are things she has to change?
Because there are other people who aren't accepting her for who she is.
Or are there people in her life who are making her feel like she's not enough? Yeah. And going back to what I was telling Justin,
it's hard to know. It's not, because sometimes you think, we project so much of our inner fantasies on others that it's very difficult to know whether someone's not accepting you or you're not accepting yourself, and you're projecting it onto other people.
Yes.
That's something to be dodgy about.
It can quite often be a combination of both.
Yeah. Like when you always know what someone's thinking when they say, I know what you're thinking. So if someone says, I know what you're thinking I'm an asshole, I'm going like, no, you're thinking you're an asshole, but you can't accept that you're thinking you're an asshole, so you're putting it into me. So it's a little trick.
That's great. I love that.
What's our next question, Ryan?
Our next question is from Jazz. I was going to say Jazz. All right. Jazz writes in, how do I know whether it's bad love or if it's good love?
Well, my pithy answer was better on this one. The thing I wrote down is hate often masquerades as love, so tread lightly and with intention. I think you have to define what love is here, and what do you mean by bad love, and what do you mean by good love? If you mean frictionless love, then that's probably not love, right? It's when I think of the people who I've loved most, the people who I do love the most in my life right now, there's certainly friction there. There's some sort of tension, but it's necessary in order for that relationship to grow.
I wrote down, if you really want to test your love, ask yourself whether you'd start the relationship over again. And what I mean by that is it's not to start with a fresh start, but would you go back to day one when you meet that person? Would you foster that relationship still? And if the answer is no, I don't think that necessarily means right away that someone's got to like abandon that love that they think they have. I mean, I think the first step is, well, how do you fix the relationship to where you truly can express love and have some good love in your life?
Right.
But sometimes we get to a point where, we hold on to things. I mean, when I think of literal things, I mean, dude, how many of our things do we let go of that had claw marks on it, man?
Yeah.
And even though those things in our lives, they weren't something that truly bettered our lives, but it's like we held on to them because there was this fantasy of those specific things making us more of a whole person. Or maybe it was the letting go of the failure of like, shit, man, I bought this like brand new car and I really liked it. And if I let it go and downgrade to another car, then like I've lost that way. And I made the bad decision getting this. I mean, we could just beat ourselves up, but ultimately, I've totally lost my train of thought.
the claw mark thing, the David Foster Wallace quote, everything I've ever let go of has claw marks on it. That's not letting go at all, right? That's just hanging on until you can't hang on anymore.
Yeah.
And
well, I guess what I was trying to say is like ultimately we need to recognize when we're clawing onto something out of pride or out of a fantasy, like we have to be very clear on why we're holding on to something that we're holding on to.
Well, because eventually you're going to be forced to let go, and why not let go now anyway?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I got a pithy one.
All right,
for this.
man.
To boil down a psychoanalytic insight is, does your love seek to fill the lack and get rid of the struggle in your life? Or does your love animate and help you enjoy the lack and the struggle in your life? That's
so much better than what we have.
God.
Yeah.
Why do we always do this to ourselves? We always bring on a guest who makes us look like idiots.
No, you do it better. You do a good enough job of that on your own. Honestly, I just animate what's already there.
I think the two of us together could beat him up, unless he knows jiu-jitsu or something.
Yeah, no. One of you, while sleeping, could beat me up, sadly. Yeah.
I have to admit something, Josh. I only look like I can fight.
You do look like an Irish guy. You look like an Irish guy coming out of a pub at 2 o'clock in the morning.
That's good. Well, let's move on to... Oh, there's P.S., Ryan. We have one more question.
All right.
And so this question is from Just Reading Mostly. And this question is it true that, quote, all you need is love?
All you need is love.
So
play us out with the Beatles.
No, we're not going to do that.
All right,
we're not going to do that. But so it's fascinating because there's something I want to talk about here. This is Bex and I got into an argument last week about this thought experiment, and I know you're familiar with plenty of thought experiments. Mm-hmm. But this one was particularly painful, and it had to do with commitment. And so I do want to talk about that. And if you want to hear our conversation about that and hear our answers to that question, then you can listen to this week's postscript episode over at the Minimalists private podcast. So, Pete, each week we do a little short private podcast just for our Patreon subscribers. It's like a bonus little episode. And I want to talk to you about this argument, this discussion, this heated discussion that Bex and I got into. And we'll do that this week on this week's postscript episode of the Minimalist private podcast. If you want to listen to that, you head on over to theminimalists.com/support. You can find all the details and good stuff over there. And also, we put out Ask the Minimalist Anything episodes and a bunch of other stuff for our Patreon supporters. And so here is a snippet from this week's postscript episode.
Human beings are creatures of meaning, and we can't get into the reasons why, but what that means is we overvalue. So
Amen.
Other creatures don't overvalue beyond utilitarian means, but human beings have not even just a capacity, it might be actually central to subjectivity, that we're able to value beyond utilitarian use, right? So that's to overvalue something. And love is a name for overvaluing. Oh. So you overvalue one person, other people look at the person, well, they're really dead on, they're nice, but you think they're the only person in the world who matters, right? So love is a modality of overvaluing.
Okay, now it's time for our added value portion of the show. This is where we talk about something that has added value to our lives recently. Now, Ryan, we're going to talk about Screenless Saturdays in a second, and you'll see why I have a physical copy of a CD in my hand.
I haven't seen one of those for a long time.
I'll talk about the experience.
Is this the 1980s?
Well, Josh is just really passionate about CDs, compact discs.
This is Matt Nathanson's new album. It is called Sings His Sad Heart. And nice. Man, it is like, in fact, I think at the end of this episode, we will play out the episode with one of the songs from here. Let me look at the back of because I have the disc here in my hand. Used to be, actually this whole album is sort of about like our unhealthy attachment to the past. So you talked about how we can change the past by reframing the past in a way, but he has these sort of these moments where he sings his sad heart. That's the sort of the title of the album here, but that's the theme of the album as well, is looking back at this sort of sad past. And to me, the album itself perfectly demonstrates, and you don't have to get the CD. I was actually surprised the CD store that I went to had the CD because it was the day it came out. But
I'm surprised that there are CD stores.
Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. I'll get there, I promise. But the thing that this album really illuminates for me is like how we unhealthily cling to the past as opposed to reflecting on it and learning from it. And you can learn from it. And it's literally some of the most beautiful writing that I've experienced in any format, not just like in text, but he has a way with words where one of the lines on there, I wrote it down here. He in the song Used to Be, he says, I've got a king-size bed and a PhD in the way it used to be.
Oh, wow.
A PhD in the way it used to, like,
Yeah,
I have
beautiful,
studied
yeah.
my past over and over and over.
again.
It is, and it's a gorgeous album, but there's this weird dichotomy too, because it's strangely upbeat. It's sad, upbeat songs. So like you're hearing it and you're like, I'm feeling like I should dance right now, but wait a minute, I shouldn't be dancing to what he's talking about. This is sad. The music shouldn't make me feel this way. There's this beautiful dichotomy there. Ryan, what's been adding value to your life recently?
Oh man, Mariah and I, we were flying, I don't know, a week ago or so, and you know how you got the movies that you watch on the plane, and we watched Won't You Be My Neighbor.
Oh, with
Mr. Rogers.
Oh, I've been wanting to see that, man.
You know, I am not like the typical man's man. Again, I may look like a man, but I'm not like really. We're just like uncontrollably sobbing during this whole movie.
You know who recommended that to me originally?
It is unbelievable, dude. Who?
Kevin Rose. He held a screening in Portland for it.
Oh, that's right. He recommended it to us when we were there.
Yeah, and
it was incredible, man. I mean, dude, it helped me feel so good about what we do, because like Mr. Rogers, he dedicated his life to helping kids. And like that was his purpose.
Yeah.
And that's what he went way out of his way to do. And you know, we have it's like when I was watching that movie, I was like, you know what? Like I'm so passionate about what we do. You know, if the rug ever got swept up from underneath of us and it just, you know, we just whatever, like Josh cheated on me and, you know, I left, I mean.
He recorded a podcast with someone else.
But no, seriously, like if shit hit the fan,
Yeah.
and like I had to like really reconsider what I was doing, and I was homeless, like I'd be the crazy guy on the street corner with a big sign that said "Have less stuff." Like I would still propagate the hell out of this, even if I was homeless.
Right.
And
It's a message you believe in.
Yeah, it just really helped me. But it's just an awesome. It's a very inspiring story. Here's the other thing too with this movie. I don't know how many kids Mr. Rogers helped out. I mean, thousands, tens of thousands, millions.
Ella's a fan.
And it's funny, dude. It's funny because watching this documentary, there's this voice. We all have, you know, the voice that talks to us in our head. And I realized like that voice is very much influenced by Mr. Rogers, because I was watching, you know, this documentary and it's showing these old clips and I'm like, oh my, like the cadence, the soft tone. I'm like, holy shit. Like I thought it was like God or like, you know, my dad, something like that. But it turns out like the when I really look at that internal voice that talks to me, especially when I'm like trying to calm myself down, it is totally Mr. Rogers. Huge impact on all these kids. But here's the thing. He had his 2 children in this documentary. They were talking about their dad. And there's nothing negative. So this is my own perception. This is not anything that's in the documentary. But there were very little interviews. Like there were only a couple lines by their kids. And one of the lines that their kid said was like, the only person worse to be raised by than Jesus Christ is Mr. Rogers. And because he felt like, you know, he felt like he was with this, you know, this Christ-like person growing up. And I could tell that, you know, he reached all these kids, but like his kids were not a product of his teachings or of his pursuit. You know, I don't know what to make of that, but you know, going back to where I really wish my mom and dad accepted me the way that I wanted them to, but they don't. Out of all the people in the world, I'm sure Mr. Rogers wanted to like really touch his kids the most.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can tell that he missed. Was it his fault? Was his kid's fault? Was his wife's fault? Who knows? Yeah. But it's just interesting how you've got someone who, you know, so very much wanted to help kids, and like he did, but the kids that he probably wanted to help the most, you could tell he didn't completely get through to.
Yeah, that's a very common thing, by the way, that the more we have an external persona, and we're projecting something out, and the more perfect that is, often the more imperfect our private lives are. So there's this thing in America called PKs, pastors' kids, I think it means, preachers' kids, whatever. And it's a very common experience of people who, someone's full-time job is to be caring and doing missionary work, and often what you find is that there's a poverty within the private life. So anyway,
it's funny. I'm fascinated by that world. Not just the. I mean, it sounds to me like you're fascinated by the sort of the prosperity church and all that for certain reasons. I think probably the same reasons that it fascinates me, because you learn from, you can learn from the good and the bad from those places. And I mean, you're much more well versed with that. But there are people like I'm not particularly religious, but I found Rob's work years ago, and I found it really useful, even. Notwithstanding the sort of religious text or subtext of it, even when he was at Mars Hill and I was in Dayton, Ohio, like found his first book on to be very useful, and especially books like How to Be Here, like found the stories in there. And I know some people even just cringe at the idea of religion because they had a bad experience with it at some point. But for me, it was like, well, this was just a different lens through which to see the world, and why not be open to that perspective? But there are other, there are other places. Like we were speaking in Australia earlier this year in the same place that it was in Sydney, where Hillsong does their does their like Sunday service or whatever, and I'm fascinated by that movement. In fact, I read Carl Lentz's book, and I
met him once. He used to drink coffee in the same coffee shop as me in Brooklyn.
Okay,
that's quite funny. He walked into the shop before I knew who he was. I was like, that guy must be a rock star. He looks like a rock. He literally looks like a rock star. Absolutely. And then someone was maybe said, "Oh, it's Carl Lentz," and we had a wee chat. So,
I mean, and so like there's to me things that like I can be exposed to these different perspectives, not have to agree with them, but still get something out of it. Pete, what's been adding value to your life recently? Anything you want to recommend?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. Very quickly, I'm going to, very unprofound, but I'm rewatching my favorite comedy show called Peep Show, and I feel that this is the most valuable bit of this whole interview, because I am turning a lot of people on to Peep Show.
Peep Show,
it's a British sitcom that it's very good because you hear the inner thoughts of the people, and so it's very good at exploring repression.
Is it sketch comedy, or is it like a?
No, it's a series of it that charts the relationship between two friends. So I'm doing Peep Show. And then I'm listening to actually a band that I really like called Ballet School, who are a Belfast Berlin band. Sadly, I don't think they're doing music at the moment, but I would check them out. Them and Daughter are the two kind of...
Love Daughter.
Yeah, Daughter. Brilliant. If you like Daughter, check out Ballet School. Okay. Ghost is a really beautiful song.
Oh, beautiful.
So, yeah. You know what? I think it's an Irish show. Father Ted.
Oh, yeah.
God, I love that. The show is so good. There's only like 3 seasons of it.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. I was going to mention this because the people who wrote that or produced it created a new sitcom called Dairy Girls, set in Northern Ireland during the Troubles.
Okay.
And it's actually very good, and it's very hard to get in America. But Dairy Girls is very, very funny. And it's the same people who did Father Ted.
Put a link in that in the show notes, Sean, so I could go back and reference it.
Oh, yeah. I've watched the first 3 episodes. It's very funny.
That is awesome, man.
All right, real quick, let's move on to Right Here, Right Now. This is where we talk about what's going on in the lives of the minimalists. Ryan and Pete, let's talk about something called Screenless Saturdays. We started doing this recently. And actually, just this month. In fact, I want to say this to Ryan. The day this episode comes out is Ryan's birthday. So happy birthday, Ryan.
Thanks, man.
You finally caught up to me.
Do we have like a meeting scheduled that day?
We do. We have a
and a podcast
and a long meeting. Thankfully, he grew up Jehovah's Witness, so he's never celebrated birthdays, and it's sort of stuck. But we've been doing this thing called Screenless Saturdays. We started it October 1st, and because social media and just the unboundless glow of our screens, they're ever intrusive.
That glow is a call-in all the time.
Yeah, whenever I go to like just a restaurant that has a TV on the wall, I find that I have to position myself away from it. Otherwise, like I just ignore the person I'm with, and I can't help but like, even if it's something I don't want to watch at all, like it's a soap opera's on, I'm like, oh wow. And so on Saturdays, basically we have a essay on our website about this, and it's called Screenless Saturdays. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. There are 3 ways that our audience is participating with this. So number 1, if you just want to take it easy, it's just get off social media on Saturdays. That's one way to do it. Number 2 is, well, you can get off also the sort of entertaining screen. So your computer, and this is sort of, this part was inspired by Rob Bell. He just sort of takes a digital Sabbath on one day a week. So taking that digital Sabbath on a Saturday. The most extreme version, which I've been doing and did last week, was no screens whatsoever, unless it's something I can't avoid. But like even my phone, like I left at home all day, and Bex left hers at home. No, she actually left it in her purse. So we had like an emergency phone, but we didn't use it, and it was beautiful. Like we literally got lost together, and like, but the first problem I encountered was like, oh, we want to listen to some music together. We're driving in my car. Let's go downtown LA, and then we went to Boyle Heights, and like, but we didn't really know where we were going because I didn't have my phone to tell me where to go. Yeah. But I remember that's actually how you used to learn a city.
You stop and ask someone, yeah.
And you figure it out. But we didn't have any music. And so I'm like, I don't have any...
That must be the weirdest thing for someone if, in this day and age, if you pull over and say, how do I get to somewhere? It's like, who is this crazy?
Right. Don't you have a cell phone?
What?
Yeah. Well, what's even crazier is when someone's they tell you of a spot and then they try to tell you how to get there. Yeah, and I have to listen to them for 5 minutes when I know I'm not going to remember any of this. Anyway.
There's going to be a big purple sign with a cow on it.
Right. Yeah. Which road do you take? And they're like, I don't know. Whichever road Waves tells me.
So we drove over to Amoeba Music, which is like the only CD store I know of that still exists. I'm sure there are plenty out there, but it's in Hollywood, not too far from our studio here. And we went there. They actually have free parking, and we went upstairs, and I bought this Matt Nathan CD. It was the day after it came out. It was already in the store, and I'm like, perfect. And then of course, one of my favorite albums, if not my favorite of all time, is David Gray's.
Picking up my book, and I'm going like, my favorite of all time.
My favorite of all time.
And then he just gets something that's underneath the book.
What
He's
is
literally
this?
using it as a coaster for his compact.
It's a coaster for his compact
I didn't
discs.
even realize this was a book.
David Gray, I see.
David Gray, the best-selling CD of all time in Ireland, by the way.
Right? Oh, I didn't know. I do like David Gray. I haven't listened to him for years.
And so White Ladder,
too mainstream.
Look at the price on.
I'm kidding.
Look at the price on that.
Oh my God! You would have been dumb not to get it, Josh.
Well, here's the thing about this. I had this sort of existential mini crisis as we were in there, because Bex is like, this goes against everything that we value.
We're impossibly buying this $1 CD.
Yeah, but like we actually went there with intention. I said, well, no, I'm actually not buying the CD. I'm renting it for $1 because next Screenless Saturday, which is 2 days from now, I'm just gonna go return this CD, and they'll probably give me a quarter for it or something, and I'll then use that quarter and put it toward another $1 CD, and then on Screenless Saturday, I'm just renting the CD for a week, and then I get to return it to them. I don't have to hold on to this thing, and then same with this. But here's the weird thing: this Matt Nathan CD was $11. I remember like 15 years ago, CDs were way more than $11.
I feel like the digital version of that album would be more. Have you looked it up yet?
No, I haven't. But here's the other thing I discovered strangely.
We don't pay for albums anymore either.
Yeah, we stream them, right?
Yeah.
The strange thing about this, I put this on because I'd been listening to this album the day before on my Apple Music, and I put this on in the car, and people are right. The CDs do sound better.
Oh yeah.
Not $12 better. I'm not going to start investing in all these CDs.
Absolutely
and I always called BS on it, like, come on. How much better is it? No, it sounds so good on CD. But guess what? The convenience is still worth it to me the rest of the time. But I learned so much from the Screenless Saturday experiment. I realized how long I've been tethered, because I've done a bunch of experiments in the past where I went without home internet, no TV, and then I got rid of my cell phone. And you learn a special kind of loneliness when you you remove these sort of pacifiers from your life. Yeah. And we're given all of these sort of pacifiers that they're injecting dopamine into our daily existence, and we get addicted to it. But man, it was so freeing in a way, because we just explored and we got lost together, and it was one of the best days I've had in a long time.
Awesome, man.
I don't know if you had any lessons.
I went to Goldbug, so it was really easy for me.
What's Goldbug?
It's where you get it's a hot springs. Oh. You get no cell phone service. Like, we stayed the night there. Like, it was freaking awesome. So maybe I cheated a little bit. This Saturday, I'm looking forward to it, though, because I'll be in LA. And Mariah, we were just talking this morning. I'm like, what are we going to do this Saturday if we like literally try to go? My TV broke. So I don't have that option. I mean, I guess we got our computers we could pull stuff up on if we wanted to.
But see, I did no computer, no TV, that's the other thing that Bex and I did. We read to each other for like 3 or 4 hours.
That's awesome.
And like I was pulling out old books. I love this one. You're gonna love this story. And for like 3 or 4 hours, we rediscovered books. Yeah. I just read her my own books. All right, chapter 1, Rebecca.
Whatever she's into, man.
I know you've read this, but it's really good. We read some nonfiction, some fiction. Like I just really enjoyed spending the day with no screens.
The nice thing about the no screens is when I do because I have no screen Saturdays, no screen Mondays. I mean, I especially when I'm in Montana visiting family and stuff. But having a specific day set aside and giving yourself permission, because you've set everyone with the expectation, like Jordan knows, Sean knows, Josh knows, like don't try to contact me on Saturday because you're not going to get a hold of me. So like, you have this permission to like let it all go and to not worry about it. And I will say, like when I go do the hot springs or whatever we do, go on the snow hill and I don't have cell phone coverage, there is that flinch where I'm like, oh man, like what if Josh really, really needs me and like I'm not near coverage, and it's like I can let all of that go. It's like you have permission to just be free, I guess.
Well, we are liturgical creatures, human beings. We do rituals, whether it'll be every Tuesday you see your friends at the coffee shop, every Friday at the bar, but we're liturgical beings, and the idea of creating liturgies of life that help us embody our desires and help us actually even shift our desires is deeply important. A lot of my work is about how do we create these liturgical structures in our existence that reform our mode of being in the world. And that's just a great example of one of those types of liturgical technologies.
Well, perfect segue. Let's talk about your work. Before we wrap up here, Pete, I just want to thank you for spending this time with us.
It's been fun.
I'm
Thank you.
really grateful. You want to talk about, I have your copy, a copy of a book that you wrote here. We'll show the folks on YouTube. It is called The Orthodox Heretic, which in and of itself is a bit of a paradox.
Now your CD is a coaster for the book.
You can actually get that.
It actually does make a great coaster. Look at that. I can fit
perfect.
2 drinks on it.
No.
Listen, I've got a lot of those coasters at home, believe me. I could build a fortress out of the coasters of my books.
Can you talk about what you're working on right now? The Minimalists are Patreon supporters of Peter Rollins.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And so we'll put a link to your Patreon in there.
Keeps my drug habit going.
I love when he walked in this morning and we were filming the what is it, B-roll, pre-roll.
It's called Behind the Scenes Live. We were doing ping pong.
We were filming behind the scenes, and Peter was like, "Oh, don't put me on camera. The government will find out that I'm working. I can't keep collecting my welfare check."
The funny thing is that's an Irish joke.
I love
it. There's a special like.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
In Belfast, at one point, it was like 25-30% unemployment.
Oh yeah, it was a lot. I was 8 years on unemployment benefit. In my life, I've been 8 years unemployed. Like before I came here.
I thought the joke was you can move to America and not have a job, and the government will take care of you.
Oh yeah, no, it's much easier back home to not have a job. I'll tell you that much for nothing. Yeah.
Not have a job back home.
I had a great time.
So we won't tell anyone you're working on anything, but what are you working on these days? And where should we point people? Obviously, PeterRollins.com, at Peter Rollins on Twitter. But what if someone were introduced to you for the first time, what would you want them to check out right now?
Yeah, well, so actually that book as well, you can actually get it free at the moment, because while I'm on tour with friend Rob, anyone who goes onto my website can sign up and get a free copy of The Orthodox Heretic. I read it. It's 33 parables that I read with some music in the background.
You're so great with parables, man.
Oh, thank you.
Oh my good. And so yes, check out The Orthodox Heretic. So they get the audio version for free.
For free if you sign up. And I'm not being generous. I just want to have your email address so I can sell you goods and services.
I love the honesty.
Well, I have a lot of holy handkerchiefs and I don't know what to do with them, to be honest.
So Josh and I typically don't send you spam, but Peter will.
Yeah, I'll send you a lot of spam. I want your heart and soul. No, I promise I won't.
No, we know you won't.
I've just finished producing a film called Making Love. I've just brought out the graphic novel Enduring Love and a commentary called A Guide to Making Love. So I've been working on that. The next big project, I do a festival and a retreat in Ireland, so I'll be doing those. I'm even looking into a documentary kind of thing. So I've got, bits and pieces. Mostly I do online talks. That's what I'm mostly into. But I have a book that's percolating on the absurd. Christianity and the absurd. Okay. So I'm excited about that as well. So yeah, lots of bits and bobs.
Well, anytime you want to come back and just chat with us, we can chat about whatever.
Or if we can help on any of your projects, man, let us know.
Yeah. Listen, I'm already coming back tomorrow to record the
Cool.
Minimalists
Nice.
We're going to book this 3 days a week.
Perfect.
9 to 5.
Perfect.
Just letting you know.
I'm only here one day a week, and that's on Tuesdays, so that's perfect.
That's fine, right?
So if you want to check out Peter's podcast as well, it's called The Fundamentalists. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, but you can just Search
find
for
it.
The
Yeah, it's
Fundamentalists
easy.
wherever you
I also
get podcasts.
I also have my own podcast. It's not a podcast. It's just an archive of talks I've given.
Oh, great.
So, but people find it in my name. Stick in the interweb is an incredible thing. It's going to be big, honestly, because you can just literally type in my name and you will get so much stuff that you will hate the day that you typed in my name.
All right, Ryan, you got anything else for us?
Yeah, man, I got some voicemail comments and tips from our listeners. Check them out.
Hi, this is Crystal from Seattle, and I had a comment regarding Angela's question about her father's items after his recent passing from episode 136. What I have done with my grandmother's belongings once she passed is I found a few items that I actually could use in my home, and that way I wasn't adding to the clutter, but rather replacing an item that I didn't really have value with or didn't have a story with something that did. So for my grandmother's, I kept one mirror and 2 lamps that I used frequently in our home. Also, when my father-in-law passed away, my husband took a few items that he could wear that were his father's, even though they weren't quite the same size. There were a few items that did work out. That way, you're getting the use out of an item, and you don't really have to determine whether or not you should hang on to it if it doesn't serve a purpose, because it is serving a purpose while also bringing a smile to your face as a memory for the people that have left.
Hi, Josh and Ryan. This is Emily from Oklahoma City. I had a tip for the callers and questions in the Spouses podcast. I recently read a book called Crucial Conversations that provides a really clear step-by-step framework on how to have difficult conversations, whether that be personally or professionally. It talks a lot about things like stating your intention and creating a pool of shared meaning and kind of shared input. It's a great resource, and I would highly suggest it.
Hi, this is Ryan from Dallas, Texas. Just listened to the Spouses podcast. I just wanted to add a comment. As of recently, me and my wife decided to become minimalists, and we had a week of getting rid, donating, trashing, or selling a bunch of things. And I heard a lot of people, that were their spouses or significant others were not on board, but I just wanted to put something out there for the ones where their spouses are on board. The best thing to do, from what I learned, was you take care of your things. Like we were going through stuff, and my wife is like, I don't know if I should get rid of this. I'm like, that's up to you. This is your journey of figuring out what you're going to keep and what you're not, what brings the most joy to you and what doesn't. And I think just answering that instead of just saying, well, you have lots of things, don't you? Still, at the end, just say, if that's what brings you joy, if that adds something to your life, if you love wearing that shirt, then keep it. Just give that advice. Don't tell them what to do.
All right, y'all, that's it for this episode. If you have a question for the Minimalists, give us a call, 406-219-7839. You can also email a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. And if you leave here with just one message, we hope it's this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.